their supply chains for future, making it agile, sustainable, and responsible. So thanking all the speakers once again for being there today for the discussion. Let me hear out loud for MapMy India, who is a technology partner, and VacuTech for their support as an associate partner to the symposium. Thank you very much for your support. Thanking all the attendees who are here this afternoon today to hear the leaders and ask their questions and be a part of the discussion. Thanking all our speakers, sponsors, and attendees for being a part of the symposium. Before we start the session, let me take a couple of minutes to just tell you something about Institute of Supply Chain Management. As an institution, we focus on ecosystem of supply chain, both in education and our events. They are totally focused in the vertical of supply chain domain. And we offer certifications from short-term to long-term in the domain of supply chain, logistics, warehouse, procurement, planning, a very well appreciated program that is leadership certification, which is soon going to commence the next batch from 5th of March, is very much appreciated by the industry leaders and accepted well. We also customize and curate in-house trainings as per the needs of the organization. That means the capability building is the strength of ISCM. Similarly, in the events wing, we curate and run events in the domain of procurement, logistics, warehouse, pharma, food, and so on. We can customize and curate events in needs of the organization. So do visit our websites of ISCM Education and ISCM Forums to know more about us and stay connected to us. Thank you so much all, and let's get started. And to do that, let me invite on stage the panel members of our first panel who are going to discuss how to orchestrate pharma logistics in continually disrupted ecosystem, what actions are needed in supply chain network design, traceability, and logistics. So let me invite on stage Vijay, who is the VP Distribution and Logistics from Elchem Laboratories, Sanjay, Head of Commercial SCM from Mylan Labs, Chandan, AVP and Head of Supply Chain from Argon Life Sciences, and Ravi, MD from VacuTech. To lead the discussion, I would like to invite on stage Girish, who is the Education Director at ISCM. I request all attendees, please keep sending your questions, and I welcome you all speakers and look forward for a grateful session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaisal. And good afternoon, Vijay, Chandan, and Sanjay.
Good afternoon.
We will see Ravi joining us quickly. He just sent us a message that he's going to join us.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm getting an error like the host has stopped my video, so I'm not sure. Like,
Yvonne, can you just check that?
Yeah, okay, now I got it, I think. Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's start with the one of the major challenges that as an industry we have had over the last few years has been very well documented and discussed a lot. However, a few things do emerge which are cause for concern, and also there are a few things which are planned which will create a lot more positivity and will need a lot more creativity and innovativeness from among the pharmaceutical supply chain community to create what is needed to go forward. The pandemic did bring forward some of the weaknesses of our industry, especially on the active imported APIs that we had, 60% of which is imported. And then thanks to Make in India and the Atmanirbhar component, we are trying to get that going. It also highlighted the shortfalls of our vaccine supply chains. Getting vaccines across the entire nation, every remote village, is a challenge in itself. Something that we did pull off and pull off spectacularly. We are one of the most successful vaccine rollouts in the entire world, if I would say. I'm not sure of China because there is nothing from China which you can actually take on the face of it. What are the challenges that we face? What are the kind of issues that we need to create? What are the kind of skills and scale that we need to create logistics and supply chain stream for the Indian pharma companies is something that we would like to discuss. We will also talk about Sometimes back, the government of a couple of years back, I think the government did come out with a draft on the good distribution practices that has to be adapted in India. This is one of the things which, if not today, tomorrow, will definitely get rolled out in our supply chains. And therefore, we also need to kind of look forward to what are those issues and challenges which will come up when we start looking at the good distribution practices. So with your permission, probably I could also dwell some time on that. To start with, if I could invite your comments on, probably I could start with Vijay. How is the industry preparing for the next? We are all talking about next normal. We have all heard of next normal. Each of us interprets the next normal in a different way. How is the industry looking forward to this new phase of supply chains in India? And what are the changes that you foresee that are happening, both globally and locally, as far as supply chains in the pharma sector are concerned?
Thank you, Girish. I think that's a very important question. Okay. As you rightly said, the pandemic actually brought the importance of supply chain, I would say, not across other functions, but also to the boardroom. Okay. So it's not about if the raw material is not there, your finished goods definitely won't be produced. So if you have to manufacture, if you have to procure, if you have to sell them, I would say the end-to-end connecting one piece here would be the supply chain function. Of course, during this pandemic, we actually, I would say all the supply chain professionals, I would say, I would applaud them in terms of the way they have, if the companies did well, I would say a lot of credit also goes to the supply chain professionals because of the, I would say, the building that reliability in terms of supplies, making sure the raw materials are available on time. We all know about what happened in China. We are still dependent on China, though government has announced certain programs, PLIs, etc. But yeah, it would take some time for us to actually become a little bit self-reliant on the API side. But particularly on the finished dosage side, yes, I would say India is one of the leading manufacturers when it comes to formulation products. Particularly going on the other side is, yes, the cost has gone high. If you want to import any raw material into the country, okay, your raw material prices have jacked up because of various reasons, okay. It will not surely come down to the pre-pandemic levels. And also your shipping cost for imports definitely has gone considerably high. I think one of the reasons why it, I think the best way to look at it is to actually, in the new normal, is to also look at how do we get into a big strategic partnership with your suppliers. How are you actually making sure your plan your demand plan is not only looking at the first 3 months, how can you look at the next 6 months to even 12 months, okay? Do the risk mitigation plan for raw materials which are critical for the business, which means it could also mean that if you have to go higher on the inventory levels for such key raw materials which are very critical to your business, we are doing that. We are procuring, we are securing the raw materials in a way, not only from a pricing perspective, but I think the supplier also now clearly knows that, okay, there will be a firm demand from our side that, okay, we will consistently pick at. At the same time, when it comes to shipping cost, because I think many suppliers also face the problem of shipping the goods. So there we look at how do we actually tie up with these shipping lines who are reliable in terms of their supplies, because you also need to look at the lead time in terms of how actually, whether it is coming from US, whether it is coming from Europe or Korea or China, how reliably you are able to actually get your raw materials at the port. Also domestically, how you are able to source it, okay? VMI, wherever possible, I think we are able to do it. Wherever it is not possible, with the with the suppliers, we are having a particular kind of an agreement with regards to maybe a 60 days of inventory. Okay. Coming on the export part, of course, that has become difficult. Today, I would say getting the inventory of containers, reefer containers, is a big hassle. And even if you get that, yeah, the kind of prices that you have to pay, your freight costs have actually gone high. And the outlook, when we actually talk to the industry leaders, shipping companies, we clearly don't see that. Okay, and most of the most of the pharma companies, I would say, in a particular sector where they did not have much of a volume, earlier used to go through the forwarders or go like, because it was available. So supply versus demand, there was never a gap. Today there is a huge gap. Okay, the demand is high, the supply is less. So the better way to actually make sure you're also able to cater to your international market is to actually enter into a long-term contract with the shipping companies, and also collaborate with the airlines with regards to specific destination which are critical to your business. So Alchem has done that. It's not only brings down your cost, you don't have to even run for inventories. You are not also looking out where the material has come to the port and you don't have containers. So actually you can try and learn from that episode in terms of collaborating with the shipping companies directly. We ourselves have done direct contracts with the shipping companies to make sure not only the lead time is adhered to, but also the demand of containers that we are placing, that is also getting acknowledged. So that's on the other side. On the domestic front, of course, the supply side, of course, there is cost pressure is there, but from a transportation perspective, it has not impacted much. Of course, there is diesel escalation which has happened, but from an Indian perspective, I would say the situation is far better. Yes, our warehousing requirements have gone high because now you're storing more raw material, more finished goods. That has to be looked at. Earlier, it was the demand planning was more to look at, okay, the dependence was only that, okay, what am I going to sell in the next 3 months? Okay, what promotions I'm planning, and in the Indian market, how am I looking at that extra 10% gain? But in today's scenario, I think things are very different. We are also looking at our competitors. We are also looking at what's happening at a particular plant, whether they are able to manufacture, whether they are able to source raw materials, because of which the demand might get shifted to companies like Alchem. And how are we able to supply such immediate demand, which actually comes because of the demand supply gap of other organizations, which they are not able to secure raw materials. So those are some of the opportunities. I would say pandemic has brought in a lot of challenges, but I would say it has brought in a lot of opportunities as well. I think the positive side of it is like for a people, like we come across various challenges, you actually overcome them, but also there are a lot of opportunities in terms of businesses. I'm sure many of us like Alchem have grown their top line when it comes to, I would say, the sales, at least in the domestic market. Alchem has experienced that because Alchem predominantly is known for manufacturing antibiotics. Okay, so our acute, we are very strong in acute segment. Okay, but one has to change with the time, and that change adaptability needs to be there. So what worked in pandemic was everyone across the world were looking at building immunity. So vitamins. Okay, so we shifted our gears to make sure that yes, this is not going to work. We will definitely manufacture antibiotics, but also let's focus on building this particular segment on vitamins as well. And we did really well. So today, if you talk about this kind of surplus of business that we have done or we have achieved in this financial year is because of that adaptability. Okay, so one has to change, and the situations have changed. Okay, it would not be that, okay, once you plan and yeah, everything is done, and then you do an S&OP meeting and yeah, that's done. Situation will change every day, every week. So it has to be a collaborative approach. So it should not be that, okay, the inputs are coming in and then, okay, I have given my plan to the production, and MRP is run, and everything is done through the system. But I think what is more important is what's happening in the external world, what's happening to the competition, what even is happening to our suppliers, whether he's able to get his raw material to actually supply finished goods. So those are the de-risking aspect, I think, which is required to be focused
Sure.
in the new normal.
Thanks, Vijay. You did cover a very, very large canvas, because I think the question itself was very broad. And it did call for a number of specific issues which did get thrown up, including rising costs, dependence on China, and how it will still take time for us to come out of it. Sanjay, if I could bring you at this point in time, probably continue with this for a little bit more and explore what are the how are we as an industry preparing for our supply chains for the next normal, also keeping in mind that somewhere we will have to integrate much more tightly with the global practices in supply chain. I think Ravi has joined us.
Girish, my sincere apologies. I was stuck in another very important meeting with my MD. My apologies.
No issues. Welcome, Ravi. Yeah. So Sanjay, if you could take.
Hi, good afternoon, Ravi. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I would just like add what Vijay has said already. So many points rightly mentioned. Really happy with the way he put all those points and covered most of the things. I'll just put a couple of things, or rather 3 or 4 things. One is the development timeline. So the life cycle of the entire development activity, right from the R&D to launch to scaling up, etc. All these timelines. There are a few examples specifically with respect to Mylan where we were able to do all the launches, specifically Remdesivir, Favipiravir, Molnupiravir in record number of time. Government has also helped us with all the approvals within the time, and other global pharma MNCs like Gilead's and all have actually helped us with technology and all. So this is one thing where which we learned during the pandemic. I think we need to continue that, the faster development cycles. That is one thing which I would like to add. Inventory, if you see, the next point is inventory. Inventories are normally high in pharma as compared to the FMCGs. But that is only one thing which actually helped us in initial lockdowns, because 2-3 months of additional inventories have actually gave us the breathing time to learn what is happening, because nothing was very clear what is happening, whether we can also go to the office, whether our CFA manpower can go to the office or not. Once transportation starts, there was government notification, but the communication has not gone down to the last man standing on the road, or rather the policeman standing on the road, and we had faced so many issues during that time. As silly issues as empty trucks were not allowed because they were actually going to factory for getting the goods, but you are saying that these are pharma goods, but there are no goods at all in this. So as silly as that problem we faced initially. So inventory is another thing which we really want to have a review once again whenever we go back to the new normal, or we're now moving into the new normal. So that is another point. As Vijay rightly mentioned, dependence on China. We still need to evaluate on that, and I think API dependent also one day will come where we will be much more self-reliant on the API. Of course, the focus on supply chain people, manpower, even though those are third party, all our partners, that is a new thing which we have been doing, which we want to continue over here. And of course, the focus on automation, digitization, that is there. That is the thing which we have learned, which we want to keep for the new normal.
Thanks, Sanjay. Yes. Again, a couple of interesting observations also on the kind of practical challenges on the ground which we need to fight with. And as Vijay said, when the nation stopped, supply chain still moved. We ensured that the goods reached the final frontier, and those nightmarish scenes that you could see in the US, supermarket stores where shelf after shelf being empty. I don't think India ever saw that kind of a situation in any store. Goods were available at the time when you wanted it. Yes, there were some challenges, and I think the supply chain, I think that's also the first time when the organization really realized that supply chain is not a back office, somewhere to be forgotten kind of department. This is the one department which actually puts its heads down and gets to work and delivers when the times are tough. I think that's one of the great positives that has come out of this. And I think that's something that we should all be certainly proud of as supply chain professionals and people involved with supply chains. Chandan, if I could bring you in at this point in time. Again, here we have, if we look back at what was happening 2019 and what will happen going forward, what are the kind of changes that you're seeing that could happen?
So thanks, Girish. And first of all, I really feel this as a privilege to be part of such esteemed panel members, Vijay, Sanjay, Ravi, yourself. I'm sure this is going to be a quite enriching session for all the attendees. Now coming to your question, what is going to change when we look at 2019, or as nowadays we like to call pre-pandemic and post-pandemic era? I think a clear differentiator so far. And just before I get into answering that, you definitely raised a very valid point of importance of supply chain coming to the fore. And other than COVID and pandemic, if I take these two words, I think third most spoken word would have been supply chain during this time. I think whether they were global leaders, whether they were various industry veterans, whether they were students. I am telling you, I was going for management selection, and I could see students coming and talking about supply chain, which earlier only after 1 or 2 years of experience, people used to talk about it. People have started understanding what is supply chain, how it is critical, how important it is for the organization as well as for the mankind and humanity across the globe, because we keep things running. So very important. Now coming to pre-pandemic and post-pandemic situation changing, if I have to talk specifically about the pharma industry or as a overall industry also, I think our focus on maybe developing the local supply chain base is gradually going to be more. It will all depend on what segment you are operating in. Like if you are operating into API segment, government is supporting with PLI schemes. They have identified certain molecules, maybe the dependency may get reduced. But if on the side of innovation and research, we may have to still do a long way. Because I don't think the talent and the infrastructure which is required to do the local development is still not that stage or to that maturity which we all expect it to be, to have some local supply chain getting developed. That would be first, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic change. Second is value of people. We all started believing digitalization, technology adoption is just going to replace people, and gradually our dependency on human intellect is going to get reduced, may not be eliminated, but is going to get reduced. And whatever now I see the global experts talking about, Industry 4.0 is all going to be of mix of human and technology. So we all want to see how human intellect and human contribution can collaborate better with technology. I think that is going to reflect also into the supply chain, whether it is pharma supply chain or within pharma, if it is say CDMO supply chain. Third one would be, how do you handle the what we call it a sustainability element? I think pre-pandemic, the focus on sustainability was more only on the safety element. Now people are talking about environment aspect as well and the governance aspect as well. Globally, we call it as ESG. Yeah. Now, if I will tell you something specific about the industry we operate in, the organization where I am associated with Aragen. It is one of the leading CRO of India and also a fastest growing CDMO. So we cater to all the innovator companies across the globe in the new drug development, including COVID vaccines. Also, we had played our role with the various innovators. Now, the challenge what we always had in the CDMO industry pre-pandemic also was the availability of supply chain even in the Asia Pacific part. Most of the dependency is on the China, and in China also some of the dependency you see, even China can't cater it, you are dependent on the Western world. When the pandemic happened, there were some regulatory constraints. You had limitations on the imports, you had to fulfill certain documentations, which again delayed or deferred the availability of material, which was very crucial for running this industry. And third biggest differentiator is we as an innovator company or CDMO, though pharma can be classified as a product-driven industry, but CDMO is a service-driven industry. So the lack of visibility, we don't have visibility what are we going to make next, because it all depends on what molecule you are going to work on. Demand is minimal, you deal in lower volumes. The agility is needed because you can't have capacity developed for each kind of molecule. Within pharma also, there are various types of reactions you need to execute, various kind of compliances you need to do. Unless the total manufacturing is cleaned up, you can't use that capacity for something else. So you need a lot of modular approach. I think post-pandemic, most of the organizations have realized it. Within our company itself, now I know we have this powder dispensing systems, which is a critical ingredient. I'm sure Sanjay, Ravi, and Vijay will correlate to it. There's a powder dispensing system which is required for manufacturing. We have now made it modular. So we have now flexible powder dispensing systems so that it is not assigned and blocked for one project. So you can always make it modular. If some product does not require it, you move it to some other product. So a modular approach in your manufacturing capacity. Similarly, a modular approach in your logistics. How you can have a capacity utilization to a greater extent. Vijay did speak about container availability, tracking, temperature control, shipments availability. Nowadays, you don't have any clarity when your shipment will get cleared, whether it will reach your port or not, how many days it has to stay in the transit. So how are you going to ensure the temperature conditions are maintained using technology, at the same time using some people skills? So preparing yourself much more proactively on the worst case scenario. I think risk management will be much more focused along with cost, delivery, quality, which used to be the iron triangle which every supply chain used to drive with. So pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, just to summarize, it is going to be a more visibility on the people front, visibility on having more agility, modular approach in your supply chain, in your manufacturing capabilities. And third is using more technology and being more focused on sustainability. Girish, you are on mute in case you're trying.
Sorry. Thanks, Chandan. It was, yes, you did bring out a couple of very interesting points. Also, you touched upon sustainability, which is something that we cannot anymore ignore. And that's something that will, and you said that 40% of an organization's emissions come from its supply chain. So if we have to leave a better world for our children, we owe it to ourselves and our children to create a more sustainable supply chain. So that will become a lot more important in the days to go by. Ravi, if I could come to you, you were heading supply chain of a pharmaceutical company before moving into your current position, enabling cold chains for the larger industry. And that is one sector where, that's one thing where in India, I think we have been we've been very late starters. We have always thought that it's okay. We never took enough care of our, I think our shoes and clothes are sold to us in air-conditioned showroom, but pharmaceuticals are stored in a hot environment. When you look at this kind of a scenario and the kind of challenges that we need to integrate into probably a good distribution practice going forward, what's the kind of roadmap you can build to create a temperature controlled logistics network across the country?
Thanks a lot, Girish. And once again, apologies to you and my fellow colleagues on the panel. In fact, actually, the question which you asked me or posed to me was the topic of discussion with my CEO, which I was in my previous meeting. So you can understand that this is such a broad topic. Yes. Where the meeting was scheduled for half an hour, it went for 1.5 hours. So the importance and the relevance of the cold chain and the infrastructure which is required to set up is very important. Of course, we have come a long way, as you rightly mentioned, and my colleagues will also agree here. We were talking about infrastructure availability at the airports. You know, the airports are not equipped with the loading bays. They are not equipped with the X-ray scanning machines where you can scan your cold chain containers or cold chain shipments. Those were the days gone. You know, we have come off that age. Today, if you are looking at the kind of infrastructure what you have at the airports, of course, thanks to all the privatization which has come in, they have got one of the best cold chain facilities at the airport, the best scanning machines, the huge scanning machines where you can actually scan the whole pallet or the whole active container through the X-ray machines. So basically, we have come a long way in terms of improving our infrastructure at the airports to handle our cold chain shipments and containers there, which has improved quite a lot in terms of the cold chain disruption which we used to face in the past. That is the peaks which you used to see at the airports or at the transit ports. In fact, actually, one step further, if you look at, we have got the best infrastructure in the country, in India now. All the major ports, you name them, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Delhi, you name any of these major ports, even including Ahmedabad also, which are the major hubs for the pharmaceutical products, have got such beautiful facilities at the airports, which are not even close to what we see in US. So in US, even today also we face, in fact, Sanjay Kulkarni is there on the call, where they ship so much of products into US markets. The kind of issues or challenges what we face in the US airports are, probably about 10 years back, we used to talk about it in India. So we have come off that age where we used to be. In fact, now the challenge is on to the supply chain managers and the logistics managers. Basically, infrastructure has improved, and the product quality requirements are more stringent now, both in terms of GDP and then GMP point of view. How do we really ensure that the seamless cold chain visibility is there, seamless cold chain requirements are enabled into our SOPs and processes what we set up. In fact, in my previous organizations, I was on the other side of the table, being in the pharmaceutical company. I have seen many lanes, many instances where, despite having all this knowledge and awareness, but we don't do a proper validation of our lanes. So every time we launch a new product, every time we are shipping a product into a new lane, we need to really do a lane risk assessment to understand the challenges, understand the infrastructure which is available at the origin, destination, and the transit airports, so that it gives us a fair idea of where the risks lie. And based on those risk profile, then the suitable packaging solutions can be decided when we are shipping these products. We have products in different temperature ranges, whether it is 1525, 228, or even for the last 2 years, we have been shipping so much of minus degree shipments also, particularly the vaccines. Sputnik vaccine, for example, has to be shipped at minus 20 degrees. So basically, minus 20-degree shipments used to be once in a while for a pharmaceutical company in the past, but in the last 2 years, it has become quite common now. So when we do the risk mapping and the lane risk assessment, then we come to know where the risks lie. And then that helps us to design our supply chain, design our packaging solutions, which can mitigate those risks. I think this is one thing which is very important for all the pharmaceutical professionals to take that as part of our daily routine. And it's not something only some few MNCs do it. Yes, of course, the concept came in from large pharmaceutical organizations, but we need to adopt these good practices within our daily workings also. So that's one. And second, you said what would be the roadmap, particularly from an cold chain logistics setup point of view, is basically, as I mentioned, the infrastructure at the airports have improved drastically, but unfortunately, the infrastructure within our factory premises, within our warehouses, has not gone beyond where it was 10 years back. That's where the management comes in and then say that, warehouse or the loading bay of the factory is the last thing anyone would, any senior management professional would go and see what is the condition there. I think the warehouse managers and logistics managers have to really bring this issue to the forefront of the management for discussion. Yes, you have quality standards, you have GMP, GDP requirements, but why don't we practice that from our own warehouses, from our own loading base? Today, we have, when you talk about cold chain shipments, even 2 to 8 degree shipments also, there are a lot of packaging solutions which are available. One of them is our own company, which is Vacutainers, and there are multiple other competitors brands also which are available. We have the best of the containers, best of the packaging solutions which are validated for 5 days, 7 days transit period. But when these containers go to the factory for loading, there's no proper loading bay there. The container cannot really abut into the warehouse with a air curtain so that the pallets can be loaded into the containers seamlessly. So what is happening is the product which is in the 2 to 8 warehouse has to be brought out. Then it needs to be stuffed into the container and then loaded into the truck. Basically, this whole process will take anywhere between about 15-20 minutes generally. And then we can't avoid the exposure of these products to ambient temperatures there. So that's one area. I think we as pharmaceutical professionals, we need to educate our management, educate our people to improve the setup at the factory loading locations. And then, of course, after that, it is the responsibility of the airlines, it is the responsibility of the freight forwarders to ensure that the rest of the journey is taken care of. So this is in general with regard to the export shipments. Domestic shipments, domestic transportation, domestic shipments, even today, there is a very little visibility or awareness in terms of maintaining the right temperature conditions for the products which we ship across the C&Fs or C&Fs to the distributors. Even today, we use only the so-called the thermocol boxes with ice gel packs in it, where most of the companies, they don't even monitor, they don't even put in a data logger in it to monitor whether the product is delivered to the C&Fs or the distributors or the hospitals in the right temperatures it is needed. I think this is one very important area, particularly in the domestic market, where we need to bring in awareness to all the people in the supply chain, manufacturers and as well as the service providers also. And this needs to get into the GDP policy, which has been brought up by the government as well. They have mentioned, very lightly in about 1 or 2 sentences in the new GDP policy, which came from the government, that the products have to be maintained at the right temperature requirements. But how it has to be maintained, how it has to be monitored, who takes the responsibility, the detailing is not there in the policy. So I'm sure that will come up in the next version whenever they are upgrading it. But as professionals, I think we need to take that ownership to set up the right supply chain to deliver the medicines in the right conditions as it is needed to be to the patient and the hospitals. You are on mute.
Thanks, Ravi. I'll take you up on the conditions and how we can do it in my next question. But I would like to bring in Vijay at this point in time. Vijay, one of the things that even Chandan and spoke about was about sustainability. And I think that's again something that we need to focus on in a very, very big way, and something that's becoming, that will occupy a lot of our thought processes. What do you think are the, what do you think is needed, and how can we prepare ourselves to execute an industry-wide sustainable supply chain and distribution activity?
I would say there is not a very, I would say, clear roadmap as such. If I have to talk about, I'm sure on the raw material side, the kind of material which has to be used, the processes like enzymatic processes, which are not very harmful, I think all those can be done. But from a logistics and supply chain perspective, I think what we can look at is how we are, I think we use a lot of packaging. I would say a lot can be done when it comes to reuse, recycling, how we can use the same packaging in a much better manner. Okay, I think that's one area I would say. If you look at for exports, we use pallets. Okay, I'm sure there are companies who are also providing solution with regards to returnable packaging. I think that's one area where you can actually not only save some cost, but also with this initiative, I think you can actually build in a bit of the sustainability factor. Packaging, as I said, returnable packaging, whether it is in domestic business or there is a lot of opportunity. I think we use cardboards for delivery of products to our distributors, to our stockists. I think that's one area where I would say there's a lot of potential, though we have done a bit of trials, but it also requires a lot of change management in terms of what is it in for the stakeholders as well. So I think that's one area where I think the use cases need to be built in a much better manner. And as Ravi talked about, I would say in the cold chain packaging sector, I would say there are a lot of solutions which talks about returnable packaging, which also not only lowers down your cost of, I would say, the entire total cost of total logistics cost. I would say that's one area which can be looked at. When you talk about specifically transportation, I would say the internal movement in terms of, I would say, consolidating your movement. That's one area. In terms of making sure your network, the entire network is optimized, like rather than, I would say, post GST. I think it's high time that we also look at how do we actually optimize, and actually instead of having 10 different ways of moving things up for your local deliveries, can you also look at using, I would say, CNGs or, for example, EV. Now, I would say Mahindra's, we are doing one trial where for local deliveries within Mumbai, or like we're trying to explore some POC in terms of whether that can be done in terms of the sustainable movement as well. In fact, from a transportation perspective, we have already consolidated, like there were part load shipments, how we can consolidate it and create a bigger vehicle size so that the number of trips can reduce. This is one initiative we have already undertaken, which is not only cost saving, but the kind of I would say the cost goes in terms of in the diesel maintenance cost. I think that has got lower. Milk runs are the other initiatives that have been taken to actually make sure that within that span, how we can actually optimize your route and also consolidate loads in that manner. So these are few of the initiatives that that we can run. I personally feel, I think one of the biggest of this would be the packaging part, I think, which we should seriously look to collaborate, okay, with certain suppliers. From my previous experience, I can tell you where we were also looking at how can a suppliers use a packaging which can be returned for them rather than those drums getting out, sold out in some markets. Same drums could be used, reused by our suppliers, which could give us some delta in terms of the procurement cost as well. So I think these are some of the opportunities which are there when for logistics and supply chain professionals to contribute on the sustainability agenda.
Thanks. That itself is a pretty large portfolio to handle, and I think we need to start identifying and defining steps to take it. Because if not today, tomorrow we will be, if we don't do it by ourselves, we might be forced by global actors to get onto that bandwagon. Sanjay, I want to ask you something that's been, that's been at the back of my mind for a very long time, and that's essentially, what are the lessons that we have learned from the world's largest vaccine rollout as supply chain professionals in the pharma industry?
Yeah, it's really a good question, and or the, like, I can say, $1 million question. What we learn, or what pharma industry mainly learn from the rollout of, as you said, the world's biggest rollout of the vaccine program, or whatever other medicines also what we supplied, is like the collaborations across the supply chain is most important thing. It is not like that you are alone or you can do it alone. So at every level, right from your supplies of raw material till the end, the last hospital or the clinic where you are delivering your products to the patients, we need to have the collaboration, build on the strengths of not only of your own strengths but your partner's strength. Other thing is that the real-time monitoring. So what is happening everywhere, how many vials are there at each of the state center, district center. So as compared to the pre-pandemic level, the monitoring level is increased, or the real-time monitoring, we are moving into that direction. We are moving towards that little bit more ideal situation on the monitoring. Demand supply alignment is another thing. So some of the companies have launched some of the vaccines, if you know, and like Sputnik, right? So, and then suddenly, like the volumes were not as expected. Also the other vaccines which are coming up now newly. So demand supply gap, understanding that, running that, doing proper due diligence. Probably it is very difficult, very easy to say, I know, but doing proper due diligence on the demand supply scenario. Also, as Ravi was mentioning on the GDP, so who is the custodian of each of the part of the chain? Like, who is exactly responsible for maintaining the temperature in hospital? Are you going to control that, or somebody else, and whether he is really that much strong to take that responsibility and deliver on that? So you have to also see that within the each part of the chain, who is really the custodian. And the supporting elements. So right from the like supporting elements, one example I can give is like the vaccine. Some places you've seen that people have used more than 10 vaccines in a while. How could they do that? And that was not envisaged at the initial rollout. And somehow later on, people found out ways to improving the efficiency of vaccine. More than 10 also they started giving vaccines where in theory you can only give 10 people you can vaccinate from one vial, and so on. So what are these new elements those are getting, or new innovations those are coming into the picture, and how we can actually use those in our next rollout? That is another point to be focused on. Also the flexibility, more and more flexibility we need to develop, asset lightness if possible wherever we can do. That is a thing. Digitization is another thing, probably a big topic, not necessarily probably only from this we can learn, but I think that is another thing to watch out for, in what way we can use the digitization in the next possible rollout of the vaccine.
Thanks, Sanjay. Yes, no, you did bring out some of the salient features of what supply chain would learn from running one of the most efficient, I would say, and the most wide-reaching distributions of vaccines in the world to the remotest part of this world, and ensuring that all Indians are vaccinated in time. Chandan, if I could bring you in here, you have also an insight into, you're also a contractor, a CRO and a CDMO, and therefore you have a lot more challenges when it comes to logistics in the R&D innovation space. How are you meeting those challenges? What are the kind of challenges that you are facing, and how do you plan to navigate through them?
Thanks, Girish. See, on the challenges what we as a CRO and CDMO mostly face, and I would talk about specific challenges we being in India, though Aragen has a global presence, but that has been one of our risk mitigation strategy, which I will speak in the end. One is, as I mentioned in my earlier talk when we were answering on the other aspects of pre and post-pandemic situation, the demands are mostly quite highly volatile in the CDMO or CRO industry, because you are not operating in a product supply chain. So every day an innovator would like to do a different research, and depending on the molecule status, the requirement may change, and it is definitely bound to change. Either it will change in terms of volume, or it may change in terms of the route of synthesis, or it may change even in terms of the specs which you are working on. Because if my customer changes the final requirement spec, looking at his final formulation product, my whole supply chain has to change for that. So that's one of the biggest challenge we have. Second is the visibility, because again, this is not a forecast or the market-based industry you are operating in. It is all the, we all know if we are working on 10,000 molecules, only one molecule finally gets succeeded to reach the end commercial stage. So that kind of challenge, and we all being part of that value chain undergo that kind of risk. Third is the complexity of compounds, because you are dealing in something which does not exist in the market. You are trying to develop a novel drug, a new drug. So obviously the supply chain also has to be new. Yes, there would be 70-80% common element, but 20% of the element, as we call it as KSM or reaction conditions or manufacturing capabilities, are going to be unique. That's why how you are going to develop a different drug. So this is going to be a third challenge. And fourth challenge which we face is on the majorly on the supply chain, though all these are also supply chain challenges. One is every time you have to start from zero. It's not that today you have developed a vendor and then you have to only scale him up, because every time you are going to buy a new raw material, even it can be a new capability. So you need to start from zero. The past becomes history and you have to start fresh. There are some advantages with the skill, knowledge and capabilities, but yes, it is more or less like restarting the things every time. And second is our supply chains are mostly concentrated either in China or US. We are, even though we have traders or distributors or repackers present in India, the origin is still not in India. If I have to talk about the discovery stage, most of our dependency is on the Western world, whether it is for animals, cell lines, hepatocytes, microsomes, for various in vitro, in vivo, DMPK studies. And if I talk about CDMO stage, our dependency is on China by virtue of their capabilities, where they can make a lot of complex molecules, hazardous molecules, DG molecules. The production capabilities and scale they can afford and offer us a much competitive cost. Ultimately, it's a global supply chain. So I can't just ignore China raw material cost to be more competent locally, because ultimately I will lose my customer. So these are, and last but not the least, which we face is the talent availability, because again, most of the supply chain guys would like to work in a bulk industry, handling bulk volume, talking about containers, talking about tonnage volumes. And when you come to a CRO CDMO industry, for them, it is like supermarket shopping. Oh, I want to deal in wholesale. I don't want to talk about gram scale or kg scale, and every time don't want to go shopping for vendors. I want to work with vendors in long-term basis. So these are the various challenges which a CDMO CRO industry usually faces. Now, how we have addressed? One is we have definitely made our supply chain much more agile. Now, so we have partnership with lot of logistics players. So we have agreements with courier cargo players at the same time with bulk players. And depending on the need, we try to adopt which is more optimum. CRO CDMO industry is more time sensitive. So agility and responsiveness is much more of primary importance as compared to, I'm not saying not at all important, but as compared to efficiency and cost. Because everybody would like to see the TAT coming down, maybe at a slightly premium if it is affordable. So we have also tried to have a multi-chain, multi-model logistics arrangement internally. So if I'm buying for lab and it is very urgent, I would prefer getting it through courier mode. Sometimes I may go for cargo mode, but route optimization is very important. Nowadays, if we see the challenge, if you want to get something from China, there are 4 different routes. By air itself, I'm talking. It can come via Singapore, it can come via Hong Kong, it can come directly, it can come via Qatar, it can come via Dubai. So which route you want to choose? And not necessarily direct route is most lesser time, because the flight may not be every day. So how you can be more agile using technology and be more aware, do more real-time monitoring of it. That is one. Second, as I said, we are globally present. We have presence in China in terms of supply chain. We have presence in US and we have in India. So again, here also we are able to use our local presence to impact our value chain or supply chain positively. And third, most important is we always have tried to tie up with local suppliers who may not be capable today. They may be technically sound, but they may not have infrastructure or resources to support our needs. So we collaborate with them. Yesterday itself, I was meeting one supplier and I was trying to tell him why he can't develop capability to have bromination, chlorination, hydrogenation in his facility. And if not me, some other CDMO will use his capability. So instead of competing with our peers, we have now tried to look at how we can come together. So number 1 CDMO in India, number 2 and number 3, we meet every week to discuss on what should be our future strategy. How do we optimize our supply chain? I think that's a big, what I would say, change which we have adopted. Instead of competing with each other, we are trying to look at how together we can offer a better value proposition to India's supply chain and then develop it. Ultimately, we will keep competing at the customer end, but on the supply chain end, let's be together. And talent development, we are looking at hiring more freshers, grooming them, developing them, and also hiring more freshers directly from campus rather than once the campus is done and you go in the market and pull out it. So these are the multiple ways where we have tried to address our challenges of CRO, CDMO, supply chain specific. But it's a deep topic. I think more we get into details, you still feel long way to go. We are not even halfway mark till now.
Yes. Thanks, Dennis. In fact, it's a very fascinating look at how the CDMO, CRO supply chain challenges operate at a smaller scale, but at a much more complex and undefined, mostly undefined kind of environment. Ravi, if I could bring you in for the final comment. One of the challenges that we also have in terms of pharmaceutical is that how does this drug, which I have probably manufactured with so much of care and precision, and also somewhere down the line ensured that at sub-transit points we have had managed integrity. How do I ensure the last mile integrity when it comes to pharma?
So I assume that, Girish, this question is specifically in the domestic distribution setup. Yes, of course, this is one of the major challenges which all pharma companies have been facing. If you look at the older, at least couple of years back, the scenario where on the packaging only store at dark and cool place used to be written, and now things are changing. Even from the government point of view, they have given a clear directive. They are giving suggestions and circulars to all the industry partners also to specify the temperature requirements and the storage requirements on the labeling, not just mention cool in store and dark place. So that awareness has already started coming in from the policymakers' point of view. Manufacturers need to adopt it. Of course, it's not only adopting it for the sake of putting it on the label, but basically in spirit also, they need to design their supply chains so that the medicine which is delivered to the patient, until unless it is delivered to the patient, it maintains the integrity of the product quality. So most of the manufacturers, as far as I have seen, as far as I am aware of, have a good visibility of the product integrity and supply chain integrity up to the C&Fs level. Most of them have the visibility of the kind of service levels, the kind of transporters. Most of them are qualifying the transporters in terms of their requirements, etc., up to the C&F level. But whereas from the C&F to the distributors, stockists, and then stockists to the retailers is something like a gray area. So there are a lot of C&Fs, which I've met them personally as part of my previous roles and organizations, who have their own internal policies, internal procedures, where they have their own vehicles, own transportation facilities, by which they cater to the requirements of the stockists and the distributors. Still, it is considered to be a secondary distribution setup only, which is still manageable. About 60-70% is under control. But the area which is completely blank, where we don't have any visibility, is the distribution from the stockists to the retailers. This is an area, even today also, pardon me if I'm using these words, but it is still considered, the supply chain or the distribution is managed like an FMCG product or like an commodity product. In most of the cities, if you have ever visited the wholesale market, it is really a wholesale market. It is still a pharmaceutical wholesale market, but when you go and see there, in about 100 square feet shop, the products are stacked one above the other up to the roof, irrespective of the company, irrespective of the kind of therapy it is going to cater to, irrespective of the temperature conditions. And these are only sold in cases to the retailers. The retailers, they come from different villages, they come from different nearby areas. They just come, place the orders with the stockist. Either they carry it on their own or the stockist delivers to their shop. But these are handled just as commodities. I think this is an area which is very important for us to look at, and then how do we improve it? How do we bring in awareness? We need to bring in the people from the trade, people from the stockist associations, to tell them, to make them aware. It is not only the margins or the profit what you earn from selling the medicines, but basically the integrity of the supply chain, integrity of the cold chain is also very important when we deliver the product to the retailers and the hospitals. For sure, this is a very, very debatable and very hot topic. As much as we discussed, there is a lot of things to do in this. I'm sure this short period of the conference would not be enough for it. But for sure, I would reiterate that this is an area where a lot of focus and effort needs to go in.
Thanks, Ravi. I think with that, we have come to the end of this. I think we have slightly overshot the time by around 5 minutes. I hope that's okay. I thank you all. We did talk about the entire spectrum of how the supply chains today are evolving post-pandemic and post-disruptions, and how what are the few core areas that we as supply chain professionals need to focus on: sustainability, cost, which will always remain. We also talked about some of the intricacies of CDMO, CRO supply chains and how they would be different in what are the kind of challenges that they face. I thank you all. I thank you, Chandan, Sanjay, Vivek, and Ravi for having taken time off and spared time with us. Thank you very much. Jaisal, it's over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Girish.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was.
You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thanks for being there for the discussion. It was lovely to have you all. I would request to kindly switch off your controls and go backstage, wherein I can invite for the next fireside chat. For the next fireside chat, where the discussion would go on how pharma companies can leverage planning for the effective supply chain management and how they can adopt IBP as a competitive tool. So let me invite on stage Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman of Institute of Supply Chain Management, who would be today in conversation with Vivek Sarbai, Senior Director Supply Chain from Thermo Fisher Scientific. Welcome, Dr. Singh, and welcome, Vivek. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. And welcome, Vivek. Nice to see you still virtually after long on the the virtual platform. And thank you for agreeing to speak on integrated business planning. In fact, I just recollect your article which we published and you wrote in April 2020 or May 2020. So I was just having a glimpse of the article and it felt like as if you have written it today. And I think that's the relevance of the article, because if you look at COVID-19 plus scenarios, and I'm talking from the beginning of March 2020 in India, the three phases that you and Manish have defined in that are quite, familiar now. And it looks like as if you had preempted and forecasted well as to how the uncertainty and disruption would unfold. And for the for the viewers, it should be clear that they had indicated that there will be three phases of planning, disruptions, and planning. And those three phases were, first, there will be a huge disruption of the entire business and hence the entire supply chain. And then there would be a phase which will come about. Maybe they have not predicted Delta variant and Omicron, but they did prevent the behavior of the supply chain, how it would go about. And they said there'll be a lot of pent-up demand which will unfold. And finally, there'll be so many changes in the larger business ecosystem that would force companies to rethink their supply chain planning, obviously their businesses also, but planning as a focus was here. And more so, the change management, both in terms of supply chain, people, processes, and technology that they predicted. I think it was very fascinating to read those lines, Vivek. I tried to catch up before I catch you up here and start the discussion. I would like you to, give us the importance of planning. We'll go to integrated business planning after this. Because what I see in pharma, and I think I know you're relatively new in the pharma domain and still a little away from it because you are into medical devices, but you've seen the same kind of disruption because COVID made you rethink, change, relearn, as you call it, and adopt to the new realities. What are the challenges in planning in the pharma ecosystem? Largely, even if you could bring it from Thermo Fisher Scientific, that's fine.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Pleasure to be with you. And I know you always intellectually extract the maximum out of me. I'm never prepared for the questions you will ask. So I will probably talk as I speak, and I will think and try to answer your questions. So I think for me, I think I look at the challenge of planning after COVID in a very different way. When, as we speak right now, there is a disruption which is happening in a global scenario. And I'm sure organizations which are either importing or exporting to that part of the world will be kind of getting into a bit of a chaos in managing that disruption which is happening as we speak right now. I think for me, the planning is probably the essence of running a business operation. and it starts from the top. The magnitude, the intensity, and the time frame in which the various layers of management will operate and plan will differ. The level of detail they will look at might differ, but almost every person in the organization needs to be involved in some kind of planning process which is running in the organization. And the task at hand for the leadership is, how do they make sure that the whole organization is knitted together so that everybody is trying to change one set of goals instead of trying to create their own goals and trying to work through everything. And I'll give an example of this wide spectrum of planning which every organization has. For example, the MD of a company is always looking at what kind of commitment, if it's a listed company, what kind of commitment it has to give to the stock exchange. And therefore, it is very highly involved in terms of understanding the macroeconomic variables, the COVID scenario, post-COVID scenarios. He or she may not be getting into SKU-wise details, but there is a bit of a planning which is happening at his level. And I'll take an extreme now view of a warehouse operation where there is a warehouse manager, there is a picker, and they are also doing a bit of planning. They have to plan the trucks on a daily basis. They have to plan the labor. They have to plan the picking times, the number of orders. So I gave you two extremes, very two different kind of planning capabilities needed, very two different planning process, but everybody is planning. So I always feel that planning is an essential part, and the organization should make sure that people who are involved in planning are extremely of high skill set, depending on the level at which they have to plan. So that's my first response to your question.
Thank you, Vivek. I think you have actually brought about the real essence of planning. And I feel there are two or three elements that come in your very first response itself. One, looking at the macroeconomic, maybe even geopolitical, as you say, some part of the world will always be disrupted, maybe because of pandemic, maybe because of war. The world is so interconnected. I think that's one element of outside-in factors that may come in. Secondly, what I see, and very important, which we miss in the planning process, you have put it very difficultly, call me intellectually, but I think that was more difficult for us to look at this. The stock market valuation, I think what you meant really in real terms is that the growth pressure on planners and on businesses that happens. So growth goals of the organization, that becomes a very important part of the plan, which goes beyond the short-term, the tactical term, agility and replenishment process of planning. And the third you talked about largely as people, and not more so people also, but you talked about warehouse example, which says that, look at this, everything is planned from a single set of objective, and everything is synchronized with a single set of objective. And I think the planning has to be end-to-end. So I think this is something that is very interesting, because what I see planning most often, doing some training program for the seniors or junior and mid-level people, is that planning is largely very, very differently defined in different organizations without a very broader framework of where does it fit in the supply chain or where does it fit in your strategic business planning. And I think that element you brought about very well. In fact, everybody asked this question, and I think I'll just go a step ahead because our town plans have covered the basics. And this I've asked you multiple times, but I think for the clarity of the viewer, what is this SNOP and how is it very different from IBP? And I'm talking about not the new SNOP or executive SNOP, which converges to IBP, but traditional SNOP, which most organizations today are trying to adopt or are adopting. So what is the difference, and how this difference is very important in understanding the transition into the new normal or the changed normal?
I think it's a great question, and I've tried to answer it in many forums, and I think I'll try to give you my view because you keep learning as you keep working in planning. See, the biggest difference between sales and operations planning, which is a conventional understanding what people have, is that you have an SKU-wise planning given the lead time you have. Within that lead time, what is the sales forecast? And then what is the inventory levels you need to keep? What is the production capacities? So you try to manage a sales plan with the operational capability, given the constraints or the objectives you will have on cost and cash KPIs and service levels. In a very simple way, I've tried to define that. Now, what it actually entails is that execution arms of the organization, which is like sales and operations, they are together and they are working and trying to be aligned on one page and therefore trying to achieve certain common objective. What happens normally is, I mean, if this works well, you will always be able to achieve your quarterly objectives, monthly objectives. But what is normal? What is the new normal in today's world is that there'll be always some macroeconomic variable which will come into play, which you have not thought through, or there will be some internal initiatives which might be under some kind of a discussion or development within the organization, but are not known to the operations team or to the sales team. And even if they are known, the exact impact of that initiative on revenue or cost is not known. So when those elements start to come and starts to get integrated with the execution arms of the organization, which is like sales and operations. And I'll take simple example. Suppose in a company, you want to launch a new product. So everybody knows that there's a new product which is coming. But if you don't know what is the impact of that product on the sales when you launch it, what is the impact of that launch on adjacent products, or how will the distribution happen? If that is not tied up and not integrated with the execution, it will create some kind of a distortion and disruption, and it will create unnecessary noise within the organization. So I've defined the problem, and now the solution lies in what we call integrated business planning, where the difference is that more arms of the organization are more deeply involved than they were in the S&OP process. And who are those 2 or 3 important arms of the organization? It is marketing and finance. So marketing and finance, which are basically shaping the longer term horizon of the organization and objectives, they are controlling the capacities, the capex, the fund flow. Those arms of the organization are now integrated in the IBP process. So you are integrating the top management, you are integrating the growth plans, you are integrating the strategy of the organization with the execution. And how do you do it? By looking at a longer horizon of planning, because a marketing or a finance guy is not worried about what's selling today or what is getting produced today, because they are definitely bothered about how my market share projections are. What is the status of my new product launch? Am I having the right amount of capital expenditure to fund an initiative? So how those initiatives will actually bring in and get integrated into the execution plan. And finally, every leader in the organization, especially which is sitting in the board of the organization, must make sure that they are looking at the macroeconomic or a geopolitical scenario and factoring that in the business plans. And that's what we call scenario analysis or a what if analysis. So, and what if analysis can be done at a micro level also, at a medium management level also, but at a strategic level also. And I think that is something which is very crucial. For example, almost a month back, people knew that there could be some distortion in Ukraine. Now, if you're not planning about it, then you're committing a big mistake. Now, you may have create a scenario. You may not activate it if there is no war, but you should have a scenario where if things happen, Are you covered for inventory? Have you lined up your logistics well? I'm just giving a simple example, given the fresh situation we have on hand. And I think that's the what if scenario which people need to do at a tactical level, operational level, as well as at a strategic level. So that's the difference between a sales and operations plan versus integrated business plan.
I think that's very interesting. And again, you brought about the growth element of it and also the macroeconomic and geopolitical scenarios that helps you to secure your supplies, secure your market, secure your factories also if they are in the global market. I want to go back to the article, Vivek, something very interesting that you both wrote. And that was that how do you respond to COVID-19? And I would just change COVID-19 to any kind of disruption. And you said that in the article, we are proposing 3 specific suggestions. And those were very interesting suggestions, which are, not only binding for pharma, but for anybody in the business of any business and largely supply chains. That is, ensure short-term is not the enemy of the long-term. Reboot new product, channel, and supply chain strategy, and practice truth as we know it. This is not the time to judge. Live with the impact of decisions. I think, Vivek, if you can take the earlier responses a little more further into these, it will be very interesting to see how IBP becomes very relevant for organizations which want to have impact in the change scenarios.
I think when I and Manish wrote that article, it was the beginning of the COVID, or we were still assessing the impact of COVID, and therefore we tried to look at it. But now, in hindsight, I can feel, that I must commend that the way the society, especially the business or teams of various companies, along with the various stakeholders, especially the government bodies, responded to COVID was really amazing, because it was a new thing for the entire human population. And I think what came into forefront was the truth as we know it. So I'll start with the third one first. The truth as we know it. I'm interacting with so many people in different companies. I don't think any business leader was not worried about the safety of the people. So there was a prime importance given to the safety of the people first. Secondly, they were actually working in extreme level of collaboration. So truth as we know it, where you're not doing the blame game, because you don't know what decisions you are taking, at what efficiency those decisions will be executed, and if they get executed, what is the effect of that. But important was to make decisions, and I think people were doing that and not blaming each other, and they were learning from each and every event as and when it was getting unfolded. So these are the behavioral aspects of any successful planning leader and the sponsor of the planning process in any organization, because planning you can't do unless you are extremely collaborative and truthful to each other. So that's the behavioral side of the planning side. Now, when you go into an event like a COVID or a war, or for that matter, even I've seen in organizations there was some consumer issue which got blown out of proportion. For example, the Maggie issue in Nestle, or a worm issue in Cadbury, or a pesticide issue in Coke. How do you react to that disruption immediately? And I think that's where you need the leader to come in the forefront, empower the teams, take control of every decision they're making, and allow the people to make decisions instead of trying to run a very centralized, kind of setup. And I think that's also very, very crucial to do that. So in totality, Dr. Singh, when you face a disruption, planning is a skill, but nothing can substitute a behavior which is needed to make it successful. So you may have an organization where there are very skilled planners, qualified planners, people who have graduated from ISCM, but if they get sponsored by a leader who is not collaborative, or who's not able to get the organization together, that skill will be of no use. So in IBP, when I started to implement, the emphasis on a successful IBP when we were trying to train people was that it's everybody's responsibility, and the behavioral side cannot go wrong when it comes to successful planning.
Thank you, Vivek. I think the one element you missed out, and I will still come back to it. And it's very interesting because, though during the COVID, you're very right that everybody collaborated like in a war room situation. Everybody thought of it. This was the beginning of a kind of a very mini IBP, if I would call it as. And I think that must be a great learning for organization, that how working together for a common goal can work much better, even during a hugely disruptive, uncertain times. But there were a lot of comments across the globe which says that the long term we're all dead, short term is important, and even short term we are dead. And I don't know, how does one reconcile the short run with the long run? And I think that is one question that all of us would be looking from you, because you've led IBP across organizations in across geographies.
So I'll give a very simple analogy to make that point. I think you're referring to the phrase where we said that don't make the short term enemy of the long term.
Long term.
And I'll take an example of a cricket match. And everybody knows in India cricket, so I can take that and I can borrow that analogy. Suppose you go into a match and you have a certain plan that I will score so many runs, insert so many overs. That's the target I need to have. And then you strategize and you put your batting order. You have a bowling strategy and a fielding strategy, and you go with that in the plan. Now, what happens in the first over? You are at 4 downs for 0 runs. So you can't live with the plan which you had. So you will probably have to take a step back. And that's where I said your short-term objective is not about that scoring, let's say 300 runs in 50 overs. Your short-term objective is to save your wickets and understand. So your short-term, you will probably not perform. But somewhere in the coaching area or where the captain is sitting, he will start to strategize that I will now make my change in the plan. Instead of 300, probably I'll watch it for next 20 overs. And probably my target is reaching, let's say 150 runs in 30 overs. Something like that. So you start building those scenarios. And then when you start to track to 150, then you'll say, okay, if I put this batsman ahead of this batsman, he may be able to accelerate and I may be still hunting for my 300 target. And I think all those, I'm trying to simplify it for all of us, but it's that kind of work which an organization needs to do. So for example, when COVID happened, I know people were trying to save their wickets. And when I say save their wickets, they were trying to save their people and save their cash. So it's like you save your people and you save your cash, you are in reckoning for the future. But if you go berserk on not having safety of the people, at some point in time, and I'm very frankly telling you this, people would become rebellious because they are worried about their own safety as well. And if you're not bothered about your cash, you will run out of resources to run your business because cash was getting stuck everywhere. So safety of people and cash were the prime objective. Now, when you started to get into the pandemic, when you started to open your supply lines, you started to not try to reach or forecast demand that it will be like this or that, because there could be some categories which are going down, some categories are like shooting up, and some categories may be having a very different curve altogether. And that's where the technical side of the planning comes into play, that you are changing the role of your portfolio depending on how the portfolio is performing in the market. And that kind of agility you need in your team to do that. And you should allow your team members to express that. So you're not hung up on one thing that I was supposed to have this product selling at this pace. But if some other product starts to sell at a different pace, you start diverting your resources towards that. So I know few organizations which took a call that they rationalize their portfolio. So if there are 100 SKUs and there are, let's say 20 SKUs contributing to 1 or 2% of sales, they took a call and said, we'll not focus on those 20 SKUs. We'll just focus on the 80 which are selling. So I think all those kind of calls which are needed in the short term, very, very crucial to make in the short term. They are not the enemy of the long term. So I think that's some of the examples I can share what I meant by don't make the enemy, the short term, the enemy of long term. Because there's some calls you will make in the short term which may appear that it's long term value destroying, but that's not the case. And vice versa also true.
Right. No, that's so true, because if you need to bring agility, that's the way, one of the element of resilient planning would be agility. The short-term planning is an agile planning, and hence it becomes a larger part of the resilient plan. Um, you mentioned one more thing, which is rare in the industry practices, though people may be doing, either as a part of your IBP or even as a part of demand planning, even if you don't have IPP. It has been said that businesses needs to do what if, that sensitivity analysis, and also a long-term scenario planning. But why? What are the major constraints that exist in organization? And this element of long-term planning or outside-in factor that you talk about in terms of macroeconomics or geopolitics does not get built into planning. Very few organizations that I talk to, and I find that this element is in a very nascent state. We may just have a theoretical frameworks to talk about it, but nobody practices it in its right framework.
So I think I have a bit of a difference of opinion with you, Dr. Singh. According to me, the problem is not that everybody is not planning or everybody is not aware. I think what organization lack is a very structured and a disciplined approach to capture those variables and integrate with them in the business plan. For example, I know a marketing guy has a very clear plan to drive a marketing strategy. A sales director of a company will always have a plan to drive the sales strategy. A finance guy will always know what is the kind of cash he needs to manage, what is the kind of P&L objectives. And so the case, if I sum total all of it, the capacity strategy or the supply chain strategy, and then integrating it at the managing director level, he knows how to run the business. At some point in time, they're also worried about, for example, I'll take a very simple example in operations, that I have a long-term settlement agreement coming with my unions. So they are aware of it. They will build that in their financial plan. They will plan the production capacity in such a way that there could be some slowdown during that period. If I look at a marketing side, there are organizations, marketing guy will always have that, I have to do digital commerce. So I have to plan my digital spends. I have to probably disproportionately spend there and not get the revenues. Therefore, I have to be more efficient in my television advertising, for example. So all those things exist and people are working on it. Now, what you don't have, and I agree with you here, is that how are these variables integrated, and then they are integrated with the execution plan, which is happening on a day-to-day basis, or let's say within the critical lead time of the organization. That doesn't exist. I agree with you there. And that's where you need to, the IBP is a very different process compared to the S&OP process. And I'm coming back to your first question, that the IBP ensures that whatever the think tank of the organization is thinking is actually linked somewhere to the business plan which the organization is chasing. So that the execution guy is not the one who's going to hold the can of a failure. It is very, very clearly linked.
Thank you, Vivek. I think you have just answered it brilliantly. And I think one basic answer that I get from this is that if the finance guy has to look at currency view of supply chain, if the sales guy has to look at pipelines view, and supply chain guy has to look at the customer services view, they all need to come together to have a single view of the organization. And I think this is where IBP helps. And this is where IBP brings in people together with all your portfolio analysis, all your demand analysis, all your supply constraints, your finance constraints, and your management, and then brings the management reconciliation of all the parts of planning into single plan. Right. So thank you very much for being here. And it has been a pleasure talking to you again. I think IBP would continue to be our interest together. So, and how it evolves in the next phase is also important, because I think still one area of a larger scenario planning like Cell and others do it is very absent in organizations. And maybe that would be a requirement in order moving away from what if sensitivity analysis to scenario planning, and taking that truth as it is, that it will come about, have a long-term plan for alternatives and a short-term plan for continuity would be a very great way to go ahead in supply chains. So thank you, Vivek, and over to you, Jaisal.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you, Vivek. It was very interesting to hear both of you all discuss the issue again and very well summarized. So thank you once again for joining us, Vivek. Look forward to more associations in future. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Singh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving next, we would have procurement professional leaders joining us, discuss how can pharma procurement add value in turbulent times. So for the discussion, let me invite on stage Dilip Chaturvedi, Assistant Vice President at Mankind Pharma, and Gaurav Arora, General Manager Procurement at Stelis Biopharma. So request you both to kindly join the stage, and to lead the discussion, I would again invite Girish on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaisal. Good afternoon, Gaurav. Good afternoon, Dilip.
Good afternoon. Hi, good afternoon.
Yeah. Over the supply chains existed for a very long time, since the beginning of industrial production. Procurement existed along with supply chain since the beginning of production and industrialization. What has changed in between has been our own ability to perceive the value that supply chains and also procurement brings into an organization. In most manufacturing organizations, the single largest spend element is controlled by the procurement function. And therefore, it has always been at the forefront of cost reduction and cost control initiatives across the board. The pandemic and the resultant new paradigms which are emerging is focusing on a lot more issues rather than just the cost element aspect of it. Today, what we are talking about is more of resilience in our procurement. Today, we are talking more in terms of restructuring our supply bases to avoid the kind of challenges that we are facing as a nation from an over-dependence on China as a supplier. And I think in the previous panel also, we had speakers who touched upon those topics. And in the previous topic also, it was pointed out that costs have gone up, and so have the procurement's pressures to kind of mitigate those cost rises are also increasing. To start the discussion that we have, I would probably first request Gaurav. Gaurav, how have you seen pharma procurement changing over to be more contextual, the last couple of years? And what are the new emerging paradigms that you're seeing?
Yeah, thank you, Girish, and it's a pleasure talking to all of the forum members and the audience which we have today. So yes, first of all, procurement, and as you said, supply chain is historical from the industry decades and century ago. I may say it's 1,000 years ago. So from the Ramayana, we are understanding this, how the supply chain is important and the procurement is important. Coming back to your question, Girish, which is, I think, on the pharma context, what kind of change which we could see. As you rightly said, now cost is not a strategy. So earlier the cost were the priority. Now, even though we have done a kind of all our agility to create a good procurement or best of the class services or best of the class supply chain, we have seen that there are possibility to under the other categories where we have to focus now. So pandemic has given a kind of lesson to us. Although the all procurement setting is kind of situation, their primary target is the pharmaceutical for public sector and health system, where the companies are recognizing what kind of changes are required. First of all, it was very basic understanding for any kind of pharmaceutical industry to look out the possibility to change and see where we can do our entire P2P process or source to pay process, remove the silos, and then relook again best fit according to their business needs. Because maybe they're the process which were the kind of historical standard process which may not be having kind of best fit for your business model. So it can be dependent on the company to company, their requirement, their working style, their territories, their business areas. So firstly, go back and look what kind of process you can improvise, remove the silos, and then change whatever the accordingly changes are required. So what are the priorities? So what we've seen is the rebalancing cost in a risk or inbound supply chain. So because that's the main changes we have seen in the last 2 years, the global financial risk was biggest issue in the business. So we have to review all the plans to avoid any kind of inbound supply chain risk and see what best policy we can adopt according to our business needs. Secondly, we are more focusing anyhow, as you said, China risk mitigation has to be planned for the all pharmaceutical industry from last 4 years, because before COVID, there was huge problem and huge challenges were based on the China Pollution Control Board. And then there is a policy of China GMP. So already the Indian users or Indian company who were buying material from China has already started this risk mitigation and diversion from China. But now more, not only China, any country, people are looking for the local sources more, but local and the bigger sources. So who has the capacities, who are having the more technical sound companies? Because in the pandemic, which we have seen that last 2 years, the company who have the more ability, agility and capacity to make, they can make at least working with the 25% or 50% of their capacity, at least they will be able to supply their demands to the local clients. So moving from country specific, now moving to up to whatever surrounding factories you have, it is better to have developed them technically sound and dependent on that. One more thing which we have seen is very important and change is supplier relationship, which we earlier talking about just as a SRM kind of plan, but that played a very significant role, that if you have a good relationship management with all your suppliers, where you have to make them kind of investment, not only on the money, investment on the technology, investment on the their business assurance, investment on their people. So then it have given you a kind of strategic and very important response that you are getting a first priority for those customers and for those vendors. So need proactive investment, right? It's not kind of just an investment in terms of giving a business to them. So it's a kind of proactive investment to your strategic vendors that would have given very good results. And lastly, there is one more changes which we have seen is it's time to not only look on your vendors, it's time to look already on your vendors vendor as well, because how they are reliable and how they are reluctant in terms of sometimes they also don't have so much of a strategic relationship with their vendor, and they must be failing to ensure their supplies. So we need to build them, we need to cope up them with the agility to have a kind of supply assurance from their vendors as well. So it's a time to look vendor as well. And then we have sustainable procurement initiative, which is kind of genuine momentum to the new normal scenario after pandemic. So these are the few changes, Girish, which is I could give as my opinion in this new pandemic area. Sorry,
Girish, you are not audible.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Gaurav. The challenges that as an organization we face in procurement are immense. Yes, no more is it cost, but more of ensuring availability of raw materials that is of prime concern. Yes, that is definitely true. Along with it, we need to bring in the necessary technology to ensure visibility. That also is necessary too. I was reminded when I was speaking to one of the supply chain leaders of a chemical firm, and he said that at the beginning of the pandemic, he had identified that there were some challenges which will emanate out of China. This was in late 2019, around December 2019. And he switched over to some European suppliers, only to realize later on that those European suppliers were also depending on the Chinese. So at the end of the day, since if your visibility is only towards your vendor, you probably will be worse off than where you were, if you excellently put, Gaurav. Dilip, if I were to bring this same thing back to you, if you look at what's happening within the procurement function over the last few years, there is a change in consumer behavior. There is an ever-expanding regulatory requirement which is coming up. There is pricing pressures on us at all times. And there is also the industry itself is evolving to bring in better technology, better visibility, better processes. And we are also standing on the verge of a GDP, GMP revolution in the country. When you bring all of these things together, what is the kind of changes that you're visualizing in procurement as a process? And what are the challenges that you see in terms of supplier partnership? Because Gaurav also alluded to it, that they are not just vendors to you, but you need to have a closer collaboration. So what are the kind of challenges that you see in that space, and what is your direction, or what is your wish list in that direction?
So thanks, Girish, for giving me an opportunity here. So if you talk to me regarding the changes in the purchase, so I would say that in the last 2 years, purchase is under tremendous pressure with respect to changes in the supply chain scenarios. You cannot predict what will be required in the market. When the pandemic started, let me tell you, firstly, the doctor said that ivermectin is working on the basically COVID. So entire company started running after ivermectin API. Even the intermediate suppliers, everybody started working in that direction, and there was an extreme shortage of the API. In the second wave, people were prepared that okay, ivermectin will be used. Then the other drug came into the market. So the industry was not prepared for this pandemic and the drug which will be used in the disease. But definitely, based on the market pull and the doctor's recommendation, entire pharma industry was running after the drugs. And there was an extreme pressure. Forget about the cost. People were in the urge of getting the material so that they can fulfill the demands. And I would say that this has given an opportunity to Indian pharma industry to develop the backward integration, which was lacking since last many years. Pharma industry, even the Prime Minister was urging that we should build up a capability of chemical industries, which was not happening, but this pandemic has given a boom to that. And now I can see that people are backward integrating and developing key intermediates and intermediate sources in India. Since I am looking after regulatory market and most of my vendors are from overseas, since last couple of years, they have started already working on the alternate vendor developments for the KSM, and we're reducing dependence from China. And the same has now started in India also. When I discuss with API manufacturers, because for a regulated market, we have to have a relationship with the vendors. It's not an instant purchase and a transactional relations. It's a long-term relation, because when I select a vendor for today, it will be commercialized after 3 to 4 years when my product gets commercial. So we have to keep a relation with the vendors. We have to understand from where they are getting the KSMs, intermediates, what is their dependence. They should always have an alternate vendors and other things. so that my continuity to the supply is maintained. Because if any changes happens at the API or their intermediates, it will lead to an redevelopment of my formulations also. So basically, I would say that for an export market or a regulated market, the relationship kind of relations have been developed between the manufacturers and the customers. So this has happened into the pharma industry. And if you talk about the procurement part, changes in the procurement, I would say that now, since the visibility of the pipelines was less, so integration between the departments have started. There are many S&OPs happening to understand and the market requirements and aligning the activities accordingly. So these kind of things has happened in pharma, which will definitely, if we continue that, we'll be able to maintain the supplies in the future also.
Thank you, Dilip. Yes, there is a number of disruptions, changes that we are facing. And then if I could take this across to Gaurav. Gaurav, one of the challenges that we face driving effective procurement practices and is having a deeper supplier partnership. And for that, one of the things that you did point it out in your earlier talk about visibility. How do you enhance this visibility? What is the kind of visibility that we currently have? And is our ecosystem ready to be giving us that kind of visibility? It's not just you, it is also your ecosystem needs to be capable.
Yeah, it's right. And it is one of the focus and gray area where entire industry and all procurement and supply chain teams are working to have a kind of not only a word visibility, but accurate, because earlier the precision would not that much countable to take the decisions. Most of the benefits of procurement functions are normal because breakthrough in purchasing strategy, final decision making, and repositioning with the company. So now data is very important. So data technology for a better quality of procurement data, it's a need of new normal. And now companies are realizing that yes, this is the one of the strongest area where they have to work on. Many of the company, including our company, and then we have already started to have a kind of digital technology to use data accuracy. Though the SAP and other features were available, and then the ERP system were helping to generate the logical data, but now we need to more have a smarter management in terms of the information and IT technology use. Then transaction automation is one more area which is, they are sourced to and procured to pay automations, because as I said earlier, all the transactions were happening in the ERP system, but now companies are looking for more and more on the automation part so that you can ease out and remove your silos and ease out your work. These solutions which are looking by the company are for all your upstream and downstream processes to have a positive impact on transaction efficiency. So those tools are available, but now only the thing is you have to create agility within your team to have a proper kind of implementation of those, because implementation, if it is not done according to your business need, then again it will be having a kind of troubleshooting to resolve those issues. The third area is to, as I said, when you have looked out your all P2P process, to remove your all redundant tasks. If you are doing unnecessarily wanted a kind of re-steps in your purchasing requisition or approvals or contract management, please look into it. And then there are the area and technology to ease out those transactions and implement that, which are not that much expensive, only a kind of focus, and only your decisions are required. Fourth most area where we are looking for artificial intelligence, because people are talking about AI, but how you are going to implement in your procurement is the important thing. because in some AI you can have a supplier performance, you have dynamic contract, you can have a dashboard, you can have your risk management with the AI. Wherever the risks are populating, you have to only align with the users and spokes to perform on the same kind of timelines to mitigate those risks. So AI is a very important feature which you can use as an intelligent procurement part. So these are the process analysis where digital support can help you in terms of bringing up the purchasing department to have their contribution in response to accelerations. So this is the development solid foundation that required to move on these kind of new requirement in terms of procurement.
Yes, Gaurav, you did talk about technology being coming and the new technologies creating more opportunities for us to create efficiencies in procurement. And the entire procure to pay. In fact, today we have not just the procure to pay process, but also the contract to sourcing also is sourcing to contract also is now being automated in a very big way. Dilip, if I were to come back to you and take this question with you, today we have technologies which can help us create, right from sourcing to contracting, then procure to pay, the entire process can be automated and made seamless. However, when we look at where we are, most of your suppliers would be at a different plane when it comes to technology. How do you plan to navigate this kind of differences in technological capabilities in your procurement process?
Okay, Girish, now most of the suppliers have also started entering into ERP, SAP, and what we are doing in our company, what we have done, we have integrated them with our SAP. So whenever we make a purchase order, a copy of a purchase order is already sent to them through a mail, and they have a visibility of our ordering, and based on that they provide us the feedback on the supplies of the materials. So this kind of strategic relationship with the vendors are started happening, and going forward I can see that maybe we will be able to see the stocks of vendors from our ERP and can order the materials also. So these kind of tie-ups with the suppliers, visibility and transparency in the industry will be moving based on the current situations. So this is my comments on the same.
Thanks, Dilip. Yes, it is very, very interesting and heartening to see that technology is now going just beyond the primary organizations, also into the supplier base. And I think today we have a whole host of technology initiatives which is making technology available as a service rather than owning it. You can, pay-per-use kind of packages are also coming. So technology today need not be the deal breaker as it was in the earlier case. Gaurav, if I were to ask you towards the one of the issues that procurement needs to address very critically is the concern of ethical and sustainable sourcing. What are your views on that? Gaurav?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. No, so this is a very relevant question for any kind of procurement forum or any kind of industry, because those were the main core need from the procurement function to be ethical. See, negotiating with the vendors with saying some of the lie and some of the tactics in terms of the your dealing is not the concern of ethical procurement. But yes, there are more bigger ethics are required, which in terms of developing your vendors and developing your company strategies, showing the same kind of balancing environment to create supply chain in terms of your industry need. those ethic and sustainability helped you a lot. Like I said, the supplier relationship management, I have seen the companies who has done decades in terms of to maintain and build a good supplier relationship, even though paying some kind of cost of money into the procurement. So that cost looks like in terms of pennies, but the year and decades relation gives you a kind of multi-millionaire kind of deals, because now this relationship has been, in terms of like a family with the strategic partner, and they are going extra step behind, and then they are going for the extra milestone to help you out in any kind of situation. We have seen pandemic, and now I don't know, you guys must be having this seminar, but now half an hour back it's already is kind of situation of geopolitical world war. So
Yes.
you don't know what is going to be, and till the time you have a kind of no sanctions or no import export ban, your relationship management will help you in terms of securing the supply, and that's how you have to be ethical in terms of with your vendors. It is not a mandate, it's kind of strategy to adopt it.
Thanks, Gaurav. Dilip, if I were to ask you, as you look out at procurement and you look at the way forward, what are the few changes that you would like to see brought about in pharma procurement specifically, and what are the challenges that you see going ahead?
The changes in the pharma, I would say that has been shifted from transaction to a long-term relationship. So earlier the people were working on single transaction, one time they purchase and they forget it, but now they are looking into a long-term relationship with a vendor. So this is one change I can see in now.
Yeah.
So this is one change I can see. And if I talk about the second change, is basically pharma, which was earlier a purchase, which was earlier seems to be a supporting function, has taken a center stage in the pharma industry, because most of the industry, most of the supply chain relies on purchase function, whether it's planning, production, marketing. So because in this agile environment, when everything is changing, only the purchase team is supporting them to meet the requirements. So purchase department has gotten more importance going forward as compared to the earlier. If you can repeat the second question, I can answer that also.
Yeah, essentially, what are the technology and things that you see that are challenges that you see in this evolution?
Challenges, let me think of that, because I cannot recollect the challenges part, but the challenges will be definitely China. China should also be a challenge in the future, because most of the dependence as on date is from China, and it will take maybe 5 to 10 years to reduce the dependence from China. If I talk about API, our most of the dependence is from China, which is gradually reducing, but still the intermediates, chemicals, and other things, a lot of dependence are still on China. So considering all these, Chinese dependence will be a challenge for us. And I can see in pharma industry, earlier China was dominating on API, now they are dominating on intermediates and chemicals. So our dependence is always be on China, which will be a challenge for us. This I can see. And regarding the purchase functions, definitely the challenges will always be there. They have to be more agile, more involved in planning, and as a support functions, our importance will definitely increase in the future.
Thank you, Dilip, and thank you, Gaurav. We had a very interesting discussion on the role that procurement will play, or rather conversation on the role procurement will play in pharma industry going forward. Yes, we have developed an agenda to deal with disruptions going forward. Yes, from the discussions, it is clear that as an industry, we are moving into the future with focus on innovation and supplier relationship and customer relationships. We are also looking more at long-term and strategic interactions with our supplier rather than merely tactical or operational. And the future of that is, again, using a lot of technology, digitalization, bringing in technology to support the new operating models which are coming up. It also means that as an organization, we also need to keep focusing on bringing in the latest steps in procurement, right from sourcing to pay. The entire process needs to be looked at as an integrated single entity. And one of the takeaways that I have is that sustainability is becoming a lot more critical to procurement as a function, not just sustainability, but also ethical procurement. And these two would also redefine the way we would look at procurement going forward. One thing is for sure, it's no longer business as usual. Things have changed. The scale and speed of transformation is also changing. The kind of disruptions that we will face is also unprecedented. And our success is essentially to bring together not just the players within the organization, but reach out to the entire ecosystem and create win-win partnership across the board so that we can deliver the results that we need. Yes, we have, as we speak today, there are tensions between Russia and Ukraine. We do not know where this will end up. Hopefully it will be a small affair, but the world is not thinking on those lines. We are just looking at a very scary proposition. We do not know what the fallout of these kind of new tensions would be. We have just come out of one tension, a new one is now on our heads. I think that is the way that we will be living forward, from one tension to the next. I thank you both, Dilip and Gaurav, for having taken time off and shared your views with us. Thank you very much. It's over to you, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you, Girish. Thank you, Dilip. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish. Thank you, Gaurav.
Thank you, Dilip, and thank you, Gaurav. Thank you so much for joining us today for discussion, accepting our request and making it here. Thank you so much. It was good to hear you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Up next, I would like to invite panelists who would be discussing on how technology can be a game changer in rising the performance. And for that, let me invite on stage Mangesh, General Manager Planning from GSK, Gnan Global and Group CIO from Aurobindo, Bhavik, Senior Director from Practo. He's a Director in Supply Chain and Procurement, Sandeep, CDO from Mankind Pharma, and I would like to regret that due to some personal urgency, Ankit would not be able to join us. So Girish, over to you to lead the discussion ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason, and welcome Sandeep, Bhavik, Gyan, and Mangesh.
Thank you.
I don't see Mangesh online. Okay. Gyan, if I could probably start with you. Today, if you look at anyone who is discussing anything related to any aspect of the organization, whether it is HR or finance or manufacturing, we are all talking of a world of Industry 4.0, which flows down to a supply chain 4.0, a procurement 4.0. So everything is 4.0 and everything is technology enabled and everything is converging towards technology. How can we effectively combine people, process, and technology so that we can deliver the results that our supply chain is expected to deliver?
Thanks, Vivek. I think this is a very relevant question and a very important question. That though we keep on talking about technology, digitalization and all, to address basically process automations or end-to-end process visibility. But people are always the most important factor who will basically interpret and utilize those processes or technology to the best for the outcome of the enterprise. So in terms of for the pharma, I think one of the area which is very relevant and very critical, not only for the organization's survivability, but also sustainability in the future, to be competitive and to expand, is the supply chain area. And pharma as an industry, it's a very high inventory oriented industry and have a lot of constraints in terms of supplies, GXP regulations, regulatory compliances. Then again, you do not have kind of 24/7 continuous production lines. Certain production lines certified for certain geography, for that regulatory authority for certain products. And that has very stringent requirement and all. This has been conventionally, when we talk about here, we'll be talking more on the generic industry, generic manufacturing, and that's what I represent. So pharma as such has its own, I mean, in terms of manufacturing, then you take supplies as well as demand both together. And if you bring it on the entire supply chain management, there has been a lot of challenges. These challenges mainly attributes the first and foremost thing, whether in terms of quality, whether in terms of efficiency, cost optimization. This is basically not having a single pan of end-to-end visibility of the entire process and functions internally, and also the external process in terms of whether customers, suppliers, third-party regulatory bodies, and the entire ecosystem which are enabling that is logistics service providers, warehouse management systems and all. Keeping all this in mind, we as an industry have grown over a period and expanded. So it has a different generation of systems in the same enterprise. Two different plants will be running on two different kinds of SOPs or specifications. So there is a lack of differently standardization, which also leads to, again, supply chain bottlenecks. Now, when we start looking into this, supply chain is at presently the core area, and this has an immense potential in case of pharma industry, not only to add to your competitiveness, but directly impact your bottom line, which basically gives you the higher performance. And I always keep on trying to compare this supply chain of the pharma with the automobile industry, which is far more matured in terms of supply chain. That what will be the enabler to make just-in-time inventory in case of pharma? Definitely it will not reach to that level because it's a completely process manufacturing and highly regulated industry. But what are the enablers which can make them very close to that in certain specific areas? And for that, these three areas which you talked about, people, process, technology, is definitely very, very important thing. So technology is enabler in terms of bringing the visibility, bringing the data, bringing the silos functions which will be running semi-autonomous, semi-automatic or automatic way, and bringing together in a single pan. And the people to be trained to get insight out of that. Unless we contextualize, because now when we talk about supply chain tower or digitalization of supply chain, we are talking about consolidating the demand planning. Most of the companies in India, they have a global reach. It's not only US, it's also European market, the emerging markets. And each of the market has its own CRM solutions. It is not an integrated solutions. So demand planning consolidation is always a challenge. Now, over in demand planning, there will be time index, seasonal index, which will vary from the product to product. There could be geopolitical issues, we cannot ignore it. There could be sanctions in some countries. There could be trade embargo in some countries. Labor cost and all. This all leads to certain advantages to bring the manufacturing in India and disadvantages in terms of bringing your optimized and efficient supply chain. The most important part when we are basically started off digitalizing, we focused more on the external part, that is the customer part, whether it is logistic, warehouse, CRM systems, bringing them together. Then we moved to the next phase where we started doing this supply planning. That means your vendors, the vendor planning, their capacity utilizations. And then when it comes to your own internal manufacturing, your operations, still most of the companies, they do not have the automated systems. That means when you talk about electronic batch manufacturing, or when we talk about different SOPs and specifications given, those threshold and the I will say that tolerance areas are too big, and which finally results in some kind of quality rejections, whether it is a packaging, whether it is a potency, or whether it is some other kind, when it reaches to your at the end of customer. And recall of this, definitely it's a kind of a very costly affair. It goes into millions, and every company who has to recall their product, they have to pay a hefty fee. And if we have to assimilate these processes to be automated, and then our people to be trained, and they have to be trained in a way that how they are not only performing their work, which they have been working manually on the pen and paper, but also taking more insights and taking more proactive actions. The whole supply chain needs to go on the collaborative manner. That means the people in operation, people in quality, people in warehouse, people in logistic, people in which is on the customer end, your sales team, business development, they have to work together. SNOP meeting and SOP kind of your planning is not only limited to the supply end planning. You need to take care of your, at some point of time, your critical vendors who probably will have different challenges in terms of supplying you. So training the people, number one. I will say that first you need to basically focus on standardizing the process, or start standardizing at unit and then roll it out to the different units. After standardizations, you implement the technology to make it happen and manage it in the future. Train the people to adopt that. Over a period, if you once you have the insight of those data and all, you can definitely have the actionable insights, which will help you to take the right decisions for your supply assurance. One more important thing I will put it here is that when we talk about supply chain planning, there is because there are too many dynamics here which are variable, and the simulation of that can only be done through the digitalizations, and digitalizations not only in the silos but on the global level. As an enterprise, you should have your every entity, every customer's data, every vendor's data. You need to bring it. You need to take those variables. You give them the right algorithms or the statistical modeling and simulate that. Simulation of that will give you that, okay, what will be the risk or the cost to the organization if there is a non-supply? What will be the cost if there is a supply delay? There are a lot of contracts for the supply for the drugs where there will be penal clauses, and these penal clauses are very heavy. So whether to produce or whether to supply early, these kind of decisions needs to be taken. In the logistics side also, what happens that when your production planning has not reached a certain timeline, you start addressing those compression of the schedule by, instead of shipping that through the water, through the sea line, you will be shipping through the air, which will increase your logistic cost by 4 to 5 times. And there we definitely need to the planning. Those plannings which are after your packaging, that thing is almost already addressed by most of the companies. But on the production side, where you have the quality related things, that is yet to be standardized and automated. For example, you will have MES system, your LIM system, your quality system. Supply chain should not work in the silo. Supply chain should have the collaborations and the exchange of data from these systems as well. And the supply chain person who is heading that, he should have an insight of the external part, external world as well. What are the changes happening in terms of, let's say, logistic related legal statutes, in terms of export import, and what will be the seasonal index which may bring down certain demand of the drug and spike of certain demand of the drug. Based on that, proactively need to plan. Another common challenge what we have, and especially I have seen in the context of India, is that many of the companies like us will have the captive consumption of the APIs. But on the APIs, you again need to depend on a specific geography, which in our case happens to be China, for your intermediates and other raw material supplies. But even your captive APIs, the APIs runs mostly those plants run based on the capacity optimization rather than specific to the kind of make to order which happens in case of formulations. These things also needs to be stitched together. And to stitch together, the process people of the different streams, they have to collaborate and they have to train on the technologies. They have to be trained how they can take more insights, and using the system, they should enable themselves to take more kind of predictive decisions and collaborative decisions. This is what I feel.
Thank you, sir. It was a very, very thorough overview of the entire challenges that we face in the how to effectively combine people, process, and technology to deliver what supply chain 4.0 is talking about. Mangesh, if I could bring you in at this point in time. Yes, we went into looking at combining people, process, technology. But the biggest need for technology comes from actually addressing the challenges that or the bottlenecks that we have in our supply chains.
Right.
Today, as we are talking about a war-like scenario between Russia and Ukraine. We do not know to what extent this war will spread and what will be the kind of fallouts of this in terms of sanctions and things like that will happen and how various supply bases will get addressed. So if you're looking at this in terms of the overall challenges that have been posed, where do you think are the major focus areas that we need to have that we can bring in specific instances of technology to look at?
Okay. Thanks, Girish. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. First, thank you. Thanks for having me here among this elite panel. And I would echo with what Gyan said some time back, right? In pharma, we are really crippling, and especially I come from planning background. So in planning, if you see, I would say pharma industry is still quite laggard in terms of technology adaptation. If you look at we are the industry which is driven by regulations, right? And we are yet to onboard the digitization bus. Having said that, all this need was quite evident during the COVID times. Unlike the common notion that pharma companies were doing very good during COVID times, I think it is product specific. Some of the products which were considered as essential medicines for the COVID treatment, you saw a sudden surge in their demand. Like you might have your azithromycins, tocilizumab, remdesivirs, to some extent paracetamols and moxiclav. Right? Vitamins, which was more over a stable segment, saw a sudden surge. At the same point in time, we had different problems with different set of products. If you look at the dermatological segment, if you look at the anti-infectives, because people were not moving out, the patient footfall in the hospitals was less, the general practitioners clinics were closed. So you see a sudden drop in demand. So we were crippling, or we were grappled with on both the sides. First, because of this COVID surge, you're not able to predict what a sudden demand could be, because it doesn't follow a traditional rear view mirror. There is a sudden surge in your demand. At the same point in time, for these slow movers, which were your regular products, which have suddenly become slow movers, you're grappling with your inventory issues. So I think the problem that could be addressed here is twofold: the predictive analysis or supply chain 4.0 or the digitization, whatever we call it. It can help us to understand or use various external factors. And first and foremost thing is understand your demand better, right? Understand your demand better, focused on the predictive analysis, artificial intelligence to get onto your demand. And second thing is use of technology to make your supply chains more leaner, more responsive to the sudden changes in demand. I think these two would be key takeaways from a planning perspective that really COVID or such situations have taught us.
Yes, you have a very strong and strong background in planning, and some of the challenges that we have in technology in our supply chains can be traced back to our ability to foresee and kind of look at the data that we have and go ahead. Sandeep, if I were to bring you in at this point in time, one of the things that we look at when we talk about supply chains and technology, we are running our supply chains, we are running our distribution chains. We have a network that that is there. We have a set of transporters whom we have engaged across the country. How can technology help us optimize this entire network which we already have? Does it mean that we may probably have to redraw the whole thing, relook at our entire existing networks? Because as you're aware, 80% of your cost is based on the networks that you have chosen. So if you need to break that ceiling, you need to relook at. So what are the kind of technologies that can help us in this?
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me over. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Lovely. Great. Interesting question. And to be honest, I think, today, if we see a lot of disruption that is happening in this space across business, right? And fortunately, and the good thing is the answer to this is collaboration, is consolidation. Yeah, and this is where technology will play a very important role. Yeah. Now, when I say collaboration, today you see that there are various players in the entire value chain, and the data is in their respective silos. Yeah. Now, what that means is it's creating some sort of a bullwhip effect. There's leakages. There's no end-to-end visibility, and things like that. And if we are able to break these silos, then there is a very good chance of, let's say, removing these inefficiencies. Yeah. Now, some of the things with which we are able to, or we are trying to solve this. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a problem fully solved. We are probably, in my view, still scratching the surface. But some of the ways in which we are trying to do this is, one, through big data lake. We are trying to aggregate data across different functions within and outside, and trying to break those silos. So aggregation of data is one big problem that everybody is solving. And then on top of this aggregated data, how do you then bring the layer of analytics, bring the layer of insights, yeah, both predictive, prescriptive, so that you are not only doing a descriptive or looking back into the mirror kind of analysis, but also predicting ahead, right? So that's where the AI ML models come in, yeah, and that's another set of technology that's being used. Now, to be honest, I haven't heard a lot of use of blockchain, in kind of getting the end-to-end visibility. There are very specific use cases that are being built on. It's still in very early stages, but it'll be interesting to see how this particular technology comes up. Another thing that I'm increasingly seeing many companies solve, and this again goes into how the data can be aggregated, that end-to-end visibility can be achieved, is taking a platform approach, taking a consolidated data kind of an approach, right? And this is where the industry players have to come together. Cannot be solved by one or few players alone. Definitely the larger players in the system can take the initiative, will have a good starting point, but then that the trust between the players has to come up for them to collaborate on this. Yeah, so this is something that I can think of, some of the ways in which this can be solved.
Thanks, Sandeep. So, Bhavik, if I were to bring the same question, see, so far all that we have spoken about are more of inward-looking technologies, with the data that we have, and probably some external data to help us in creating a better or more efficient supply chain within ourselves. But the larger part of it is, how do we collaborate across, not just within the organization? In fact, in the last panel, at the end of it, we did hear about how CDMOs were collaborating across different CDMOs, were coming together to create an ecosystem by which they could encourage, suppliers to come up to scale, because probably because of their specific requirements. But if you were to take it beyond, how can our industry collaborate to embrace digital transformation to achieve what I would call it as a operationally resilient supply chain?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. An outside approach that you talk about, Mr. Girish, should not also be from the same industry. It can be from different industries. Like one of our panelists spoke about automobile industry. Let's take the nearest one to our industry, which is FMCG. Today, the supply chain, be it first outbound, has visibility of the tertiary sales that happens within the country. Why can't that be adopted by pharma? The challenge is the fragmented nature of this industry. There are over 100 different ERPs, 150 different POS systems, and more than 150 different PMS systems. If we have to get the right data to talk to each other, it's a mammoth task, and the industry has been trying to do it for over decades. Hence, looking outside the industry has to have first a view that it is not a ROI on day zero. You need to give time, you need to give right resources, and you need to wait for the outcomes that over a season and over multiple seasons can show you right metrics for you to chase for. Technology is then useful. Hence, if we look at outbound data, or if we look at outbound solutions, let's look at solutions that are talking to each other real time. And there are very, very simple solutions, very open source solutions, and solutions that can give results within fraction of minutes. But then there has to be a buy-in of all stakeholders. It cannot be an objective or a KRA or a KPI of only one resource. Until and unless the whole organization realizes that it is for the betterment of the entire organization, it won't fly. So technology is an enabler. With these 3 points, if I look at an external data, if I look at the simple solutions that can make a difference, and if I look at the KRAs of every stakeholder aligned to the objective of the organization, the basics are to ensure that the master data management is in place. I've been Chief Digital Officer of Asia's largest CDMO. And the first requirement when you say about CDMO is that with multiple suppliers, if we have to bring them to speed, is my technology talking to their technology? Is my data talking to their data? It isn't, right? We don't have, by the Ministry of Commerce, when we have to do exports, we need an ISI number for exports, but not for India. Why so? So there are no basics that from data perspective are in place. Once when they are in place, then the reality check has to be done in terms of all those which you put in terms of optimizing networks, right? So when these networks can be optimized, be it from any vertical, any department, horizontal or a metrics organization, it will give us results which can be tracked as a dashboard for various stakeholders within the organization. And this is something that large startups who have grown over the years have been doing. This is something that smaller startups are doing pilots with large pharma companies. And these are startups to whom, if we give opportunities, we will see immediate results, but then it has to be then integrated with our larger companies for a long-term collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks, Bhavi. You did bring up quite a few interesting aspects of it. In fact, at least in the technology space, and if I were to look at it across industries, yes, standardization is something that we need to have across to help enable exchange of data. Sometimes it becomes so simple as, the label that we stick onto our cartons. Each plant would print it in its own way. And therefore, are we making those labels machine readable? Are they machine readable is something that, again, things that we don't look at. Basic things like that can trip up collaboration and exchanging data across a network. Yes, that is true. Mangesh, if I would bring you in then, you also have had a distinguished stint in planning. Today, we are all talking data. Some of them is data which we have. Some of them is data from external sources, which is crucial for us to plan. And unlike in other industries, the pharma demand is not driven by the consumer. It is rather influenced by a member out there who is a doctor, whose prescription habits are not cannot be easily modeled. Right? So there's a challenge when it comes to demand, understanding demand from that perspective. If you look at FMCG companies,
right?
Are you looking at any kind of advanced data analytics or AI that can help us kind of understand where we are and how our demand is being, these challenges that we have in planning?
Yeah, of course. So if, as you rightly said, typically in pharma industry, there's a difference between your customer and your consumer, right? So you try to influence an HCP who then prescribes your drug. But the ultimate key is in hands of that retailer who, for his own benefit, could switch the prescription. Right? And that's where that's the problem which is grappling the industry now. So although you have a good product, you're promoting it to doctors, the doctors are prescribing your product. But when it comes to a retailer, he is getting more margins on certain products and he's switching those products. So I think that's where a technology can help us to map that particular area very well on where you see that, because you also have prescription data coming from somewhere, you also have the sales data. Now, marrying these two things could easily tell you that which are the areas where the prescription switch has been happening more, which are the areas that you should be target, what kind of promotions or the other activities you can run through your distributors to the retailers. And as Bhavik said, that this is highly unorganized. Like in the pharma industry, you really don't have control over data. So first thing is building that data, building that master data. Because as of now, if you look at Indian pharma scenario, you would have close to like 7,000, 8,000 distributors each pharma company is doing with. And every day, 10, 15, 50 odd distributors are being added. Now, forget about having a central database or having all that data. The first and foremost thing here is how do you ensure that your secondary sales, tertiary sales are mapped? And I think once you have that, and that's where technology can immensely help us, that once you're able to map those things, it will be much easier for pharma companies to understand that whether their marketing activities, whether their promotional activities, are they bearing a fruit. I think that's my view on this part.
Yeah. Yes. If I take this across to Sandeep, what do you think are how can pharma also jump onto this bandwagon of data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and what are the kind of benefits that our supply chains can get from it?
Very loaded question now, Girish. See, to be very honest, I don't know which part of the value chain in a pharma cannot benefit from data, analytics, AI, ML, and you name it, yeah. But I think all three of us, Bhavik, Mangesh, and myself, probably alluding to the same point. Yeah, the building block of that is the data, right? And this is where the challenges start coming in, right? So, to be honest, the way we have been approaching this is, we started looking internal first, right? And we are seeing and we're trying to identify what are some of these use cases which we can kind of quickly implement so that we get some tailwinds, for AI and ML kind of stuff. To be honest, if you ask me, AI is too far. Yeah, I mean we kind of use AI and ML together, but I don't think we are close to AI. Machine learning is something we can still push hard for. Yeah, and some of the typical use cases that we are trying to kind of achieve, if you ask me, are within the logistics control tower itself, right? So how can we predict, let's say, certain events to happen, and how can we then prepare for them in advance? In control tower, we also look at KPIs, right? Monitoring KPIs. How can we bring in a bit of a predictiveness in whether we are going to meet a certain KPI or not, right? And instead of making it descriptive, and once the KPI has not been met, and then you are thinking, how do we meet it and how do we make it? Instead of that, can we get some additional runway, so to speak, right, for us to achieve it? There are a lot of cost factors in the entire value chain from manufacturing onwards. We are also trying to solve for, how can we model the cost behavior using the data, and then see whether there are a few parameters which, when tweaked, can kind of optimize the cost. So cost is another parameter that we are kind of trying to solve with the help of data, with the help of advanced analytics, etc. But easier said than done. We are trying to achieve this in very smaller, biteable, digestible kind of form. Scaling this itself is going to be a huge challenge. And I'm just talking very early use cases.
Yes.
So this is where we are, and this is how we are kind of approaching this.
Yes, Sandeep, that's true. Most of these technologies that we are talking are still now, if you follow the Gartner's hype cycle, they have not come up to the, they have still to hit the trough of disillusionment and then come to a embrace where we can have a practical use case available. Bhavik, which brings me to a question. You also have been a CDO. When you look at Gartner's hype cycle year on year, you find some 7-8 new technologies suddenly appearing on that. And today we are throwing technology at people like Mangesh and Sandeep, left, right, center. And today, and you have to now take a call on what is the technology that you can bet on, specifically when it comes to an organization. And as an organization, most organizations are not in the technology business. For them, it's something that's very difficult to invest unlimited amounts of money there. How do you walk that minefield of technologies which are you still need to go into that, but you do not know what will be the future of that? How do you take the decision?
Thanks for this question. Okay, couple of approaches. First approach, do you want to leapfrog? A large pharma company who wants to do what Sandeep just said is one approach. Another approach is beat the trend, do a leapfrog. When there are online pharmacies, when there are industries which are bagging billion-dollar valuations, do you want to leapfrog? Can be another approach. Second way of looking at things is like this, that if you know as an organization within your management strategy as to where is your objective, whether it's a top line or a bottom line, whether it is to increase revenue or it is to decrease cost, pick snippets of these and test through available technologies already in the market. And these available technologies that are already in the market, the agencies or the vendors themselves will come to us and give us use cases that they have executed such and such strategy or such and such solution in XYZ company. And if it fits into your strategy, implement it. Alternatively, there are solutions outside of our country, be it not only in executing sales, but also in R&D or in operational functions, or maybe for manufacturing RPAs, which have been implemented in other parts of the globe, but not in our country yet, or not in some of the large pharma companies yet. use those as case studies within the organization, and find out what is best suited as per strategy of that organization. Last approach. In case of we looking at ideas or innovations or solutions, build an innovation center with a scrum team within your organization. Until and unless an organization has that free power to actually make that execution happen within that scrum team, rather than moving files and mails from CCs, BCCs here and there, look at that innovation center within the organization who will every week come back to you with ideas and solutions for every department that can make a huge difference. So look at such kind of an innovation tower that Steve Jobs had it in Apple, and many other companies in IT have it. So I remember once when for my previous startup, which was a B2B marketplace for medicines, and I met one of the MDs of one of the pharma companies. They ended up saying that we are in the business of IT, and we are a technology company in the business of pharma, but we run IT. So it is now becoming synonymous that digital and IT is every household name, but we will remain in a business of pharma, FMCG, so on and so forth. So last point of mine, that look at an innovation tower where you have key stakeholders, and large MNCs do have, I don't want to name them yet, but they do have, and that's a core team that drives innovation and execution within the organization.
Yeah, essentially you're talking of a twin strategy where you have a business as usual running, and alongside it an innovation lab which tries and tests out these innovations so that you can decide for yourself what kind of technology and innovations can be adopted for your organization, because at the end of the day, technology also has a huge amount of cultural overhang. You know, the organization also has to be able to embrace technology. It's not just the availability. Today, technology is universally available.
Absolutely. So BAU and innovation shouldn't be looked at as a trade-off, but should work parallel.
I mean, in fact, if I may come in.
Yeah, sure.
So, no, very interesting point, Bhavik, and this is from my experience now over last 2 years. What we have seen, or what I've rather seen, is it's a lot more easier to do incremental innovation in-house, right? But when we are looking at these leapfrog kind of use cases, it's rather the trend that emerges is bring the innovation from outside, partner with startups, etc. Because traditionally the mindset that is that we carry a lot of baggage, and let's face it, we are in the space of branded generics where the focus, it's a commoditized space. The focus is a lot on price. So cost becomes important, etc., etc. And these are some of the factors. This is the baggage that has been, traditionally carried now over quite some time. So similar to what Bhavik mentioned, I think that's the approach. Incremental, improving the processes, bringing that incremental update, upgrade, innovation is typically happening in-house, and then we partner with the startups, etc., to attempt at these leapfrog use cases, so to speak.
Yes, in fact, that's an interesting view of it. But the catch here is that most of these leapfrog technologies, the pioneers are startups, and large organizations typically have a kind of their vendor approval form has a 3-year balance sheet requirement.
Yeah.
No, not really now, Mr. Girish. Post-COVID, things have improved a lot. I can give you a couple of quick examples. Remdesivir, which Mangesh spoke about, I was able to ship it before 12 noon order to Narayan Hidalia in Vaishnadevi before 5 p.m. Just imagine. Now, it doesn't need technology. It needs that zeal. It needs that enthusiasm. It needs that way in which it can be executed, irrespective of technology. Then you build upon it. You get the right use case and you build upon it, right?
Yes.
It makes a difference. One. Second example, quickly, is AI-based scanning tool, which helps detect better outcomes for radiologists, right? Pharma companies have, a pharma company that I know has partnered with the radiologists across the country to execute this, that it can give them a error-free experience of what the outcome is based on that AI tool, where the input is from various other sources. Right now, as a large pharma company, you can't do this ethically, but you can partner with somebody who's doing it and partner with that stakeholder for executing your strategy of business. It's a big difference, right? The way you look at it. So
yes,
pharma companies can do innovation, can do technology, but they are in the business of doing what they are good at. So partner with those who can. Where companies have solutions that can be leapfrogged as execution for better outcomes, do that as a pharma company. Yeah.
Mangesh, if I could invite your comments on it.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Bhavik and Sandeep said. But along with that, even my approach would be to approach it in a jigsaw puzzle kind of thing. Take one piece at a time, try to fit it. But while doing this, and without losing the focus on the overall picture, but I think one more important aspect of it when we are going for this transformation is also whether your organization is geared for it. Whether culturally or your organization processes, do they support it? There is no use of having an artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive analytics. If somebody in your organization is going to override those decisions and saying that, okay, based on my experience, I think this is right. Although some tools suggest you that this is the optimum amount of inventory you should keep, you are saying, no, I still want to go with 60 days of inventory. So I think along with this approaches, technology, what is also important is to evolve in that organizational culture and your supply chain processes. They should also get matured. So working alone on technology is not going to give you those benefits, but you have to work on the process and people as well.
Sandeep, if I could again come to you. If you were to create a digital roadmap today, what would be on your wish list?
Yeah, how I wish I could create a digital roadmap based on my own wish list. Yeah, I mean, that would have been a dream come true. To be honest, the digital roadmap is always derived from the business roadmap. Yes, there are certain aspects of a digital roadmap which are more with respect to preparation for future. So foundation platform kind of investments. But other than that, most of the digital roadmap is derived from the business roadmap. Yeah. Now, one of the ways we tried to define our digital roadmap is what we did was we went through the entire pharma value chain. Yeah. And then we did an independent, honest assessment of what are our strengths in the value chain. Yeah. And then the vision, I would come to roadmap, but the vision we took for ourselves was in the value chain, wherever we are strong. Yeah. We would use digital as a disruptor of the market. Yeah. Wherever we are mature, we will use digital to help us get a leadership position in the market. And in the rest of the value chain, parts, we would use digital as an enabler to help us do things better. Yeah, to better productivity, collaboration, etc. Right. So digital as disruptor, digital as leader, and digital as enabler in some sense. Yeah. So this was the broader vision, and what we then did was, if you see today across all the elements of the value chain, the problems that we are facing, the problem that the rest of the industry is facing is very, very similar, right? And then what we did, we took some of these problems, we kind of prioritized them based on impact and feasibility, and in some sense created a roadmap of what is it that we want to achieve. Yeah. But again, going back to what I started with, all of this is one side. The business priority is another element of prioritization. And that is how we went about prioritizing, saying, okay, this is this specific part of the value chain we are strong at. If we invest in digital here, we'll achieve much more on the top line, or we'll improve on the bottom line, etc. And that's how we kind of then did the prioritization. Now, once the prioritization is done, and by the way, sorry, I forgot to also mention, there's the short term and long term, right? So some of the investments are building blocks to the larger investment, right? So kind of two-pronged approach. And then once we created this roadmap, it is then about execution, right? So aligning the right set of stakeholders. And I loved what Mangesh said, because to be very honest, transformations are not a technology problem, yeah, or not a technology use case or a case study. Transformations are culture and mindset problems, yeah, and which is why there's this element of low-hanging fruits. There's an element of early success, getting tailwinds. There's an element of finding the right culture mindset in the organization, hence the chances of success improve, etc. So these are some of the factors that influence the prioritization, but in some sense, this is how we went about it. What we are probably going to do is a couple of years from here, when we have achieved some sort of maturity, we'll relook at the roadmap and relook at the way we would want to strategize and vision it for ourselves. But early days, and this is how we're going about it.
Yeah, Sandeep, I completely, one of the things I do recognize is that a roadmap essentially is a long-term process, but technology is a very short-term, because the speed at which technology evolution is evolving creates, sometimes renders that whole process moot. We are not sure if the technologies that we are talking of today would be finding acceptance in the industry, and therefore trying to create a roadmap on something which we are not sure of can be very, very daunting task. Bhavik, if I were to pick on you to have a slightly different kind of conversation. As organizations, when we start looking at technology enabling or digitalization, we have a set of processes which we have, and we say that these processes we will create a digital road, way ahead and go ahead with it. But today we are seeing a situation where the business models itself are being challenged. Do you see these two twin influences converging and creating a larger value to an organization? If so, what are the kind of business model changes that you are tracking?
Oh, I track almost all business models within this industry because of my multiple roles. First thing on converging of various business models. Let's simplify the thought as business models that are new generation versus those that are here and now, which are focused on profitability versus the others are focused on valuation or market cap or COCA, cost of customer acquisition, which is way high. So I don't see both converging for sure, and for a simple reason that what Mangesh spoke of is culture. Culturally, if you expect either of the teams to converge to execute something, will not happen. And I've failed a couple of times, and I understand that it will not happen. How can this be solved is a business model that's omni-channel. Look at a culture that can drive new business models which are omni-channel, which is digital first as an approach, or which talks basis data and outcomes rather than gut feelings, rather than feelings that are loaded onto a certain family member within the business or certain employee who's been there for 20, 30 years, so his decision is final. It shouldn't work that way today. What should work is build an omni-channel approach end to end. You don't know tomorrow the doctor to whom you are expecting a prescription can become your dispensing doctor. You don't know that a city where you were selling more of cardiovascular products, you will end up selling more of hospital supplies to that doctor. Right? So you really, really need to build an omni-channel approach towards outbound supply chain, towards making real-time availability of SKUs that are in demand. If not, they will be replaced by somebody else, where your efforts of multiple weeks, months, and years goes down the drain. So in today's world, if an omni-channel approach is built, where if we are able to map the consumer life cycle of acquisition underlying the customer life cycle of cost of acquisition, then you have a business model which will stay and earn you dollars in bottom line. If not, it is a short-lived story till you find a resource. The resource is there. After 6 months, he finds a better job. After 2 years, he finds a better job, and you need to rework on the entire strategy again. So to conclude, convergence, omni-channel is the way to go. Be it then whether you are B2B or B2C or B2B for C. Thank you.
Thanks, Parth. Mangesh, if I were to bring the same wish list to you, when you look at your digitalization roadmap, yes, it depends not only on the organization, but also the leadership of the organization and the kind of business you are in. What are the kind of technologies that you would want to keep an eye on?
Yeah, given the certain the recent COVID situations that we have gone through, I think the first thing would be a faster and more responsive supply chains. So ability to predict the market demand or understand the market demand in much better way, much efficient way, much faster way, and then having a supply chain which is lean enough to ensure that to gear up to those demand changes. So primarily now you cannot change your manufacturing capacities at a short-term notice, or you cannot change your lines or the switchover of the products. But at least the technology in the initial thing can help you to have that information available across board, across all your stakeholders, right from your demand team to your distribution to your commercial to your procurement team, so that everybody is geared to respond to those market changes in a faster way. Because I think gone are the days where we had those traditional supply chains where we had 2 months of a frozen horizon. You cannot change demand within this horizon. Now, all you need is the responsiveness and real-time decision making. I think these are the areas where I feel this digitization or all these technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, ML, could help us.
Sandeep, any particular technology that you're keeping an eye on?
Oh, sorry. Yes, very much. It's now a fairly mature technology, but IoT is something that we are really banking on. Considering manufacturing is a capital intensive business, so to speak, and we have already invested in a lot of it. Trying to figure out how can we bring in IoT and related technologies to one, sweat the existing capital investments, and to instead of data traveling from let's say HMI to a paper to a digitized form into a system for analytics, the data travels directly from the machine into let's say an analytics platform and help us generate the insight. Right? So this is to me one of the problems. If we solve, then we have solved a lot of we have solved for a lot of inefficiencies in the manufacturing itself. Yeah. So yeah.
Thanks. Bhavik, any particular technology that you're closely tracking?
I think from an organizational perspective, the organization that which you represent for us, it will be how we can lower our logistics costs on a daily basis, build AI tools that give us optimum outcomes basis on logistics is something that we are working on.
Thanks. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a wonderful conversation. We covered a lot of ground, not only within digitalization, but we also looked at some of the core underlying drivers of digitalization and the challenges that we face as we go on. Something that we all agreed was that it's not just about technology, it's also about the organization, its people, and its business. And that each time we look at technology, we also need to look at being flexible enough to run a technology incubation or a twin strategy, have a business which is running, and then also nurture and test out technologies which you think will be useful to you as an organization. I think that's a fantastic takeaway which Bhavik did talk about. That's fantastic. I thank you very much for having shared your time with us. It was nice having you, Sandeep, Bhavik, Mangesh, and I think we will be in touch. We will be looking at, we also are closely watching technology and looking at technology in terms of how it can change and affect supply chains, specifically when it comes to emerging business models in supply chain and how technology can kind of speed up that whole process and create a more efficient and cost-effective supply chain at the end of the day, which is responsible and responsive. And that's something that we also will somewhere along the time catch up sometime, because technology also has a role to play when it comes to one of the crucial aspects of supply chain, which is sustainability. We have not gone into that in a big way. I think we will have a specific supply chain sustainability event where we will focus on how technology can drive sustainability initiatives. I think that's something that all of us will also want to be implementing in our supply chains. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for having spared your time. Jaisal, it's over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Girish. Thank you, Sandeep and Mangesh, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Really enriching. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. I would like to thank all the speakers who joined us today for the discussion. It was great takeaway for all the attendees, and thank you very much for all your contribution. We look forward to staying in touch and have more associations. Thank you. I would also like to thank our sponsors, technology partner MapMy India and supporting partner VacuTech for their support to the symposium. Also thanking all the attendees who spared time in this afternoon for joining us for discussion. And last but not the least, thanking entire ISCM team for their support. Let's all stay in touch. Do visit our website and keep following us on social media pages. Thank you so much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.